Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Ned, the dire wolf was still asleep when he looked into the kennels. The other occupants were very quiet indeed, not cowed, more in awe of the giant creature. He looked at it in some bemusement. The previous night had been odd. He remembered it, but vaguely, as if it had all been a dream. He had felt like a puppet, made to dance at the whim of another. Well, whim was the wrong word. Intent was the right word. He had felt the grim intent behind the thoughts of the dead man who had possessed him. He just couldn't work out what had triggered it. Had it been one of the artifacts in that maddeningly confusing secret room in his solar? Had it been something else? In which case, what? He sighed and then turned away. The arrival of the dire wolf was a worrying sign. The fact that he had been possessed by one of his ancestors was even more worrying. Why had it happened? For what reason? Was it that the old gods were forcing matters somewhat? If so, then why? He remembered that Robb had told him that originally the mother direwolf had been killed by a stag antler in the neck. The symbolism of that troubled him, yet here she was, alive and unharmed and dangerous. What would she be like when she woke up? And despite that, why was he not afraid of her? Because the fact was that he was not. Why? He did not know. Hearing the sound of approaching feet and heavy feet, at that, he looked over. Great John Umber was approaching, and he looked a little wary. Not that Ned could blame him. His old friend had been rather disturbed to see that red fire in his eyes. And also odd, everyone in Winterfell who had laid eyes on him during his possession still looked at him with the same kind of awe. It was all a bit much, frankly. Still, if the worst came to the worst and the wall fell and he had to order his people north to meet the others, he had little doubt that they would heed his call. "Morning, Ned," the Great John boomed. "So, how is she?" Ned quirked an eyebrow at the sleeping direwolf. Asleep. The Lord of the Last Hearth peered at the creature. "I heard that someone was saying that your kennels were originally built to house direwolves. They look big enough?" "Aye," Ned said thoughtfully. "Lewin's very excited and is going through the records again, and Robb's looking at the objects in my solar. I wonder when my ancestors lost the link to the animals." The Great John frowned and thought. Maybe the same time that you forgot that Godswood was in the Wolfswood. Maybe when direwolves no longer came south of the wall or were hunted, instead being tamed. Maybe someone died too young or too unexpectedly before they could pass the secret on. He winced a little. "I bloody near wet myself when I saw your eyes, Ned." He eyed his old friend. "Glad you didn't, might have been messy." This got him a guffaw, which was interrupted by the sound of a horn being blown from outside the gate. Answered by a horn from the gatehouse. They both turned to face in that direction, and after a moment, Roderick Castle puffed his way towards them. "Big pardon, my lords, but there is a party of men approaching. They bear the banner of House Reed." "Howland Reed, at last," Ned grunted. "Admit them at once." As the older Castle walked off, he stroked his chin and then looked at the Great John. He said that he was on his way here, but I expected him a day or so earlier. The gates creaked open, and a party of men rode through, with the leading pair of riders bearing the banner of House Reed, the black lizard lion on a green field. Behind them rode a small man dressed in green clothing, who looked about the courtyard as soon as he entered. As soon as he caught sight of Ned, he waved and then dismounted rapidly, before handing the reins to one of his men and then walking swiftly over to the Lord of Winterfell. He was followed by a boy and a girl, both in their teens with brown, almost red hair, and both also clad in green. He could tell at a glance that they were related to Howland. The Lord of Greywater Watch strode up to Ned and the Great John, and then, much to Ned's surprise, he formally went to one knee, followed by the two children and then the rest of the Creneggermen behind us. "Lord Stark, the Stark in Winterfell, House Reed had obeyed your summons," his old friend said in a formal voice. "Command us, and we will obey." Ned looked down at Howland. "Stand, Howland. I would never have you kneel to me," he protested. "And welcome to Winterfell, you and your men." Howland stood and then stepped to one side and gestured at the two children. "My son, Jochin, and my daughter, Mira." "Children," Lord Eddard Stark. The two stood and then bowed formally, and Ned looked at them carefully. Mira was the elder and had what looked like a cheerful face that seemed to be unnaturally solemn at the moment. Jochin. Well, the boy looked as if he had once been blind, but now could see for the first time, judging by the way that he was blinking at things. "Ned." Howland said quietly. "I must talk to you at once. The moment that I heard the call from Winterfell, a call that rang through Greywater Watch as nothing has for 1,000 years, I knew that I had to see you. My children, too, especially Josian, as he is a greenseer." Ned stared at the boy, who shifted a little under his gaze, and then looked back at Howland. A greenseer." "Aye," Howland said quietly. "His dreams come true. Although Lord Stark, your pardon, father, of late, they have changed," the boy piped up suddenly, and then he paled. "I see that you have fropped your direwolf already." All three crannogmen were staring over his shoulder, and Ned looked behind him. To his astonishment, the direwolf was sitting at the entrance to the kennels and was looking at them all intently. When she saw him looking at her, she tilted her head and then blinked, and it was at that moment that he realized that the fur above her eyes had changed color a little. It almost looked like the shape of a hand. "'Tis a long story," Ned said wryly. "Very well. Let us go to my solar and discuss this." Robb. Grey Wind was in Winterfell. Well, he was in his mother, who was in Winterfell. But at least he was here, and he was safe. He thought about the day that he first met Grey Wind, the day that the Night's Watch deserter had been executed, the day that they'd found the she-direwolf dead with a stag's antlers in her throat. That had been a day of portents. Worse, clear portents. How had they missed it at the time? How could they have failed to see the connection? He sighed and then moved on from where he had been staring out at the Wolf's Wood. What else had been lost or forgotten? Sensing movement to one side, he saw Maester Luwin walking towards him, or at least in his general direction, as he had his nose in a large book. Walking and reading was not a good idea, as was proved when the Maester almost fell over the hem of his robes. "Careful there, Maester Luwin," Robb said with a smile as he reached out with a hand and steadied him. The older man looked up. "Lord Robb, I've been going through the histories again, and I think that I have found some references to the Godswood where your Lord Father met the dire wolf." This was interesting. "What references?" "See, here, the histories make a reference to your slice of ye oats and ye old Godswood. Now, I always thought that those were references to the Godswood here in Winterfell, but there are other references to your Stark riding to your oath place. And then apparently riding back with a wolf companion. It's unclear why the link was broken, though." Robb looked over the faded spidery hand on the page and found himself nodding. Perhaps someone died early before the knowledge could be passed on, or the direwolves stopped coming south of the wall. That's the first one that we've known of in years. There might be more information in the room in Father's Solar. That was what I thought too. Your Lord Father is there now, talking to Lord Reed and his children, though. Howland Reed, Josian, and Mira. That was another change from the past that he remembered. The Reed children had been sent to him to pledge the loyalty of their house after he was proclaimed the king in the north. But Lord Reed had stayed in the Neck, and he remembered that the Great John had told him that Howland Reed had not left the Neck since he returned from Robert's rebellion. There was a tale in there somewhere, and he needed to talk to Father about it. Then we shall talk to Father about this when he is free. Donchi. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining, but it wasn't too hot. Today the wind was blowing softly from the west, enough to cool and also to fill the air with the smell of the herbs that grew not so far away. She loved days like today. Well, she usually did. She was starting to worry about her brother. Viserys had always worried her more than a bit. He always took things passionately, sometimes to the point of anger, or even fury. When the dragon was roused, then Viserys could be vicious and violent, more violent of late than usual. Their descent in penury had come as a shock. Hearing Viserys being called the Beggar King had been a shock. Seeing his reaction once he properly heard what was being called out, that still made her flinch. And now he had his dragon egg. Magister Motapice had given it to him 2 nights previously, a large egg that was so black that it seemed to be almost another color. Viserys had been more than delighted. He had been enraptured and had instantly dismissed the Magister's gift to her of 3 far smaller dragon eggs. In fact, he was still as enraptured now over his large egg as he had been before, possible even more. He spent hours every day stroking the egg and whispering to it, "I shall call him Beleren, the Greater Black Dread, because he will be greater and more dreadful than the dragon flown by our ancestors," he had told her in a gloating voice. "And when is hatched and grown enough, I shall fly him on black wings. First to Storm's End and burn out the fortress of the usurper, and then on to Casterly Rock, to find and eat the traitor Lannister." Yeri next, to snuff out the Aryans, and then the hovel that is Winterfell, killing all the barbarian Starks. Only then shall I fly on wings of vengeance to King's Landing, and then I'll hunt the usurper through the halls of our ancestors, and find him and have Beleren, the greater Black Dread, eat him. She shivered a little at the memory of the sound of his voice. There had been something wrong with the timbre of it, a sick fascination. Yes, she was worried about him. Hearing voices to one side, she pressed a little deeper into the alcove by the side of the balcony overlooking the main square of Pentos. She loved this view, but it could be infuriating to be so near but so far to the life and energy of the city, especially as she had heard so much about the newest people to enter the city. They were the company of the Rose, and they sounded, well, romantic to her when she had heard about them. The problem was that Viserys had also heard about them, but had had a different reaction. He had insisted that he lead a party down to the city to recruit them. They claimed to be of the north, from Westeros, he had proclaimed self-importantly. I am their rightful king, therefore they should be fighting for me, especially as those Dothraki savages have all vanished eastwards. That had not been a tactful thing to say to the Magister, although he had admittedly looked puzzled whenever any mention was made of the Dothraki, whose behavior had apparently baffled everyone. That said, his response to Viserys and his comments had been rather firm. That would not be a good idea, my king. You must remember that this rather bizarre company of sellswords are exiles from the north for a reason. They refused to bend the knee to your illustrious ancestor Aegon, the Conqueror, and despite the fact that that was centuries ago, they still, I am told, do not love Targaryens. They would not follow you, my king. They might even wish you violence. Which had eventually, after some muttering, shut her brother up. The sound of voices receded, but then she heard the sound of horns in the distance, and she craned her neck as she peered down. Far below, she could see horsemen entering a square with what looked like furled banners, and then she wondered if she could get down there and see what was going on. But perhaps she first needed to find a cloak and a cowl. Ned. When they entered his solar, Ned noticed that Howland stopped and stared the moment that he saw all the books, and then again at the map. He had ordered a new one to be drawn up, showing the settlements that he now knew existed north of the wall, but for the meantime, he had the old one, albeit annotated and in a more prominent position. And Howland stared at it in astonishment. What are those places in the lands beyond the wall, Ned? Wildling settlements, Ned said tersely as he poured some wine for his friend and some watered wine for the Reed children. Mance Rayder was here a matter of days ago. The Wildling king beyond the wall. And then Howland stared at his son, who looked a little startled. The king with no crown, who kneeled to the wolf. Aye, father, Josian Reed said in an emotion-choked voice. As I described it, this made Ned stop and pause, before waving at them all to be seated. You dreamt it? I did, Lord Stark. Ned stroked his chin and then looked at Howland. The legends of the green side are true then, and if those are true, I wonder what else is. Your pardon, Ned, but you do not seem too surprised by this. Howland pointed this out with an odd, unreadable expression. But then, we did all hear the call to Winterfell. It fair made Greywater Watch shake as nothing else has for 1,000 years or more. You sound as if you knew what it was. Ned, we Crannogmen. We do not forget. We are of the north, and we have never been conquered. And we remember the things that others might forget. There are tales of objects in Winterfell. Things owned by your ancestors. Things made by your ancestors. You must have had good reason to send out that call. Time for a little candor. Howland, he said with more than a little weariness. I did not know that I was doing it at that time, but it had to be done. The others have returned, Howland. The long night comes. We must prepare. I thank the old gods that they allowed me to see what must be done, especially as I knew nothing of anything. Howland paled a little at this. You knew nothing of what? Brandon was the heir. Father must have told him of what might happen if the others came again. I knew not. I do not even know how much my father told Brandon. All I know is that, for various reasons that I shall you about later, Great John Umber came to Winterfell with the Hearthstone that his family have protected for many long years, and it gave me a vision. Ned stood and walked over to the map and then pointed at Hopemorn, and then, as he opened his mouth, Josian Reed broke in. The home of the enemy, the place that knows no hope, the long mountain with the old prison and the gate that was broken open. The boy was white as a sheet, and shaking. I have seen it in my dreams, Lord Stark, and other things. This was important. He could feel it, and he sat quickly before the boy even as Howland pulled his own chair closer, and Mira peered at him worriedly. Go on, lad. What else have you seen? My dreams have changed. I once dreamt that the sea came to Winterfell, drawn there by an empty man who belonged to both. Theon, thought Ned, with a shock. But then that changed. The sea piled up into a great wave along the coasts of the north, but then it did not move. Instead, it froze. I could see men within that frozen wave, hammering at the ice. And then it went south, and as it moved, a wolf made from seawater howled at it and snarled at it. Theon again? Ned thought, confused, but a different Theon, perhaps. How much has he changed these past months? What else? A stag shed its horns as it found a great sword, found a purpose too. I dreamt a small man became a great one, helped by a man who rose from the dead who had never been dead. And I dreamt of an empty lion with broken sword who stood on a precipice with death on one side and heroism on the other. And last night I dreamt of a sword of light from the stars. It drove back the shadows, but it wasn't enough. It needed more. He sank back in his seat and then rubbed at his forehead. Your pardon, Lord Stark. Father, dark have been my dreams of late, and I cannot see it any more. Ned looked at the boy, confused. He noted that Howland looked shocked and Mira looked a little smug. It? He prompted. The boy looked back at him levelly. The moment of my death, I've known it for some time. My lord, or I did. I cannot see it now. Ned leant back in his chair, and then looked at all three of the Reeds in turn. You children look tired. I think you should join my family as they break their fast. Jameson, should you see anything else, please let me know at once. Howland, please stay. I'll have food brought up. There are things that you should know, and other things that you need to see. When the children left, Ned made sure that the door of his solar was locked before he turned back to his friend with a smile. I thought that you would never leave the neck again. 'Tis good to see you, old friend. Aye, Ned, you too. But first you need to know something. I left Greywater Watch not just because of Jojen's dreams. Something else has happened. We found signs that a great body of people had crossed into the north. He stared at Howland. What? When? We do not know exactly. They passed by an old path in the neck. That's what concerns me, Ned. 'Tis a very old path. Old enough that it is almost never used by Crannogmen these days. So whoever they are, we don't know exactly when they passed through the neck. But not more than a month ago. He thought furiously for a long moment. No word had reached him yet about any violence from the area, so whoever they were keeping a low profile. But who were they? Any idea of their numbers? Hard to tell due to the nature of the ground. At least 1,000, though. As soon as I heard, I ordered that Mo Kalen be reinforced at once and restored as much as possible. I beg your pardon if I overstepped my bounds. But, Howland, you did the right thing. Think nothing on it. He paused. I will send a raven to King's Landing at once on this. Whoever these people are, they must have come from somewhere. The Lord of Greywater Watch nodded shortly. Then he looked at Ned. I stayed in the neck to protect the secret. Does the boy know yet? He does, Ned said softly. I had to tell him. Fortunately, Maester Oben was here at the time. Howland's forehead wrinkled. Master Aiman from Castle Black? Aye, his nearest relative. The eyes of the Crannogmen widened for a moment, and then narrowed a little. Oh, of course. I had forgot his full name. What will the boy do? The world knows him as my son. I have written to Robert to ask him to legitimize him. He pulled a slight face. I did not think about the pain he feels when people call him a bastard, even though it is of no fault of his own. He will be a Stark, and if need be, he will have a hold of his own somewhere. And if one day it's necessary for the truth to come out, then, well, we shall deal with that path if and when we come to it. He's all I have left of Lyanna, with that she had never met him. A short silence fell. Howland Reed finally broke it. For what it's worth, Ned, at Harrenhal, all those long years ago, I once saw a look on his face. It was just after the tourney. 'Twas the look of a doomed man, a trapped man. I know not what he was thinking. I just know that he did not look like a man who thought that he liked what he was doing. Harrenhal. The tourney there had been a lifetime ago. So much had changed since then. Brandon had been alive and was due to marry Kat, father was still managing things from this very room, and Lyanna had been her usual fiery self. Arya reminded him so much of his sister, and then there had been the others. The Knight of the Laughing Tree, who had whipped the Mad King into a fever of paranoia. Robert, still young, still fit, and still without the cares of the throne. Rosier, whose actions had started the landslide that had obliterated the Targaryens. And Ashura. Too many secrets, he muttered. Always too many secrets. Then he stood and walked over to the tapestry, where he pulled it back to reveal the door to a surprised Holland. This was my father's secret, he told Brandon. We think, but not me. Come. I need to show you some things. If the Cranigan remember, then perhaps you know what some of the things within are. Tyrion. It was a glorious morning, albeit a morning that had consisted of him sneezing a great deal early on due to the cloud of dust that was now rising from the inn, but a glorious morning nevertheless. He looked at the inn as it slowly receded into the distance and then looked ahead again and preened more than a little. The inn was now under new management, although that wasn't really his fault. No, it was instead the fault of the former landlord, a man who it seemed had been incapable of dealing honestly with anyone at all at any time. Short wait, bad food, non-payment, it was a long list, and it had therefore been a bad idea to try and cheat one of the merchants who sold food to the inn, still less the formidable wife of that merchant, especially to then double the folly by leering at her and then suggesting that he comfort her. The result had been her fist slamming into his jaw and breaking it, sending him insensible to the floor, his head entering the slops bucket as his body came to rest. The resulting fight with his people had been short and curtailed by Emmon, who arrived on the scene and knocked the landlord's chief flunky out with one punch of his own. As things quieted down, it was discovered that the landlord, full name one Edwin Dickon, had his head in a full slops bucket and had apparently drowned, which was such a tragedy. Well, everyone had had a moment of silence for him that might have been a heartbeat long before proceeding to celebrate a great deal. Anyway, given that the merchant and wife had been owed a great deal of coin by the late landlord, then that made them the new owners of the inn, which they promptly took control of, as Tyrion and his party watched with great glee, and then started to clean up. Along the way, as things were cleaned, various things were discovered that showed that the late and increasingly unlamented landlord had also been a thief. In fact, he had stolen quite a few things, given the cries of furious anger that had risen from various people. Various other people had been grabbed and forcibly searched before being ejected, and yet more things had been found, including some of the money that Daisy Sherstone had brought. Saying that she had been angry about this had been like saying that water was damp, a massive understatement. She had raged around the inn before vanishing. He eventually found her in the stables, feeding the thin mare that it turned out was hers. I can feed Wanderer more oats now, she had grumped when she saw him. I have the coin that thieving bag of pus stole from me. He had winced a little at the description before bowing and leaving her to it. He had ordered fresh bedding for all his men, and wonder of wonders, he had not been bitten by anything when he woke up the next morning. And now they were on their way again, on the road north to Winterfell. Daisy Sherstone rode with them, clutching at what looking like a small chest covered in oilskin and glaring at anyone who got too close, including him. So he had decided to charm her a little. To tell the truth, it was proving to be interesting. She did not regard him as a freak at all. Instead, she seemed to regard him as being something of a fellow scholar, to be regarded from a cautious distance due to academic rivalries. It was most odd. It wasn't until they stopped for some food at noon that he finally got a decent conversation out of her. Once again, there had been a hill nearby with a ruin of some kind at the top, and he had finally given in to his curiosity and stumped his way up to look at it. It seemed to be the remains of a building of some kind, built in stone. He looked around it and then tried to imagine what it had been. It was then that he heard the sound of footsteps and he turned to see Daisy Sherstone looking at the ruins. I was wondering what this place was, he called out to her. I have seen many places like this on the road north. A small smile quirked her face for a moment. 'Tis a place for a signal fire, Lord Lannister. Call me Tyrion, please, Lady Sherstone, and Lord Leinster is my father. He looked at the stones again. A signal fire. Lord Tyrion, then, she conceded. Then she gestured at the stones again. We have not always had maesters and ravens here in the north, Lord Tyrion. There was once need for a chain of signal fires for ordinary messages. This would be, She orientated herself as she looked at the horizon. Red Hill, that's Broken Crag to the north and Crow's Claw to the south. And then Surestone Peak beyond that. Her voice wobbled as she said those last few words. Tyrion did his best not to look at her, knowing that she would not like to be reminded of any such weakness. He could tell that she liked to think of herself as a strong northern woman. Then he frowned a little. But surely I have seen more crags in other places than would be needed for a signal network. She looked at him and then smiled a little. The Elder Crags, as the histories call them. They are places best defensible against the others. Before the wall was built, this was a place of war in winter. Lord Tyrion, the first men had to defend themselves. Many skirmishes were fought here in the long winters of old. The others, he said carefully, surely they are not but legends. This brought him a snort. Then why build the wall? To defend against wildlings? I think not. But the others have not been seen for thousands of years. Lord Tyrion, she said caustically, evidence of absence is not evidence of non-existence. And this shook him. You have read the works of Torrhen of Myr then. Him and many others. My father would have been a master if he had not met my mother. He liked to read a lot. He taught me much. Her slight smile faded. And who is to say that the others have not returned? Not me, nor anyone with the blood of the first men in their veins. The call has gone out, Lord Tyrion. You will hear of it in Winterfell. There was something about her voice that spoke to him of a terrible surety, an absolute certainty, even. The call? And what was that you said about ordinary messages being sent? Have there ever been any extraordinary ones? She just looked at him, something burning in her gaze. There have indeed. One was sent this past month. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. She spoke the words, as if they were burnt into her heart. And then he remembered that the same words had been spoken by that captain on the sea, and that he had heard similar words said by others on the road. That the Stark called for aid, that the others came. A river of frozen water slid up and down his back for a moment. For a moment he recalled his dream, and also the moment that he had come awake in his bunk at sea. At the start of this long journey of his, and the words, they blazed a trail in his mind. A trail of memory. After a long moment, he licked what were suddenly very dry lips. My lady, will you ride with me? I feel the sudden need to hear more on this matter. Ned. The selection of items in the secret room within his solar had long defeated him. So many odd things, little, but every one of them had been of importance to his ancestors, and therefore had to be of interest to him now. He looked to one side and smiled a little. Howland Reed's reaction had been one of absolute shock at the sight of the room, followed by intense concentration. He had first looked at the little green figure, which he had then tilted his head at. I have heard of this, he said slowly. I think that it is a key, but a key to what? I know not. Then he turned his attention to the bronze mirror. And this, well, again, I have heard of things like these. Mirrors were said to be able to talk to one another, as long as you knew who held the other mirror you wished to talk to, that is, and when. That was another factor, I believe. And I think that there are more of these around. But the strength depends on a few things. Like the strength of magic. That made him smile a little. Lewin asked the Citadel about that. He was fascinated to learn that the glass candles can be relit. That magic has returned. Howland nodded slowly at that. I am not surprised at all by that. I did suspect it, especially after hearing the call, and then he looked at the little cage with the hand, and he paled more than a little. Before rallying, we have one of these at Greywater Watch, but an empty one. Ned, do you know what you have there? I have not the slightest idea. 'Tis the hand of a wight. Well, a very dead hand. Ned stared at the skeletal hand and then shuddered away from it. Are you sure, Howland? Aye. He reached out and then brushed the dust from the front of the cage, revealing some writing in the form of runes. See? Ned peered at the runes carefully. The runes were now clear, and he frowned a little as he recalled his rune lore. Cage-ed firm. His old friends smiled at him. Almost. Cage-proof. An old term, but one that is apt for this. The cage is said to slow down the process of rot. A part of a wight is placed in it, like a hand or a foot, and the cage's magic preserves it, so that it can be passed to the south to prove that the others have returned, that the wights exist. Ned stared at the cage. His ancestors, he thought, were smarter than he had first thought. Then he set his face and pulled out his dagger and jabbed at the bones in the cage. They did not move at all. Dead then, I will give orders to burn the bones. As you need to, the legends say that any part of a wight must always be burnt, even after it has rotted down into immobility, or, in this case, bones. He nodded. A shame. I have sent Benjen north of the wall to get the hand of a wight, so that proof could be obtained. Howland stared at him in some surprise. Surely Castle Black has one such cage, or knows of it. Castle Black, he said sadly, has forgot many things, I fear. Another long stare from Howland. Forgot such things as the reason why the wildlings are as they are. I think that originally that acted as scouts for the wall, but when the others vanished, then the Night's Watch forgot the link. Perhaps the wildlings did in part as well, and we know from some of the records that the Night's Watch seems to have forgotten what kind of weapons are needed to fight the others. We know that obsidian, or dragonglass, is a weapon against them, and we need a weapon. Legends say that the weapons of the others would shatter steel as if it was made of glass. Howland nodded slowly. I see. Then he paused. I take it that fire would work against them then, as some of the legends say. Ned replied. He leant back in his chair again. I have done much thinking about that. We know that the others have returned, so at some point I will have to call the banners against them and help man the wall. We will need all we have against the others. Obsidian, fire, but what else? What else can we use? I have pondered much on this. A silence fell, as they both thought, and then Howland broke it. There is a reference in the records of Greywater Watch, he said, almost reluctantly. A record that is a fragment of a fragment, and it mentions swords made from ye fire of heavens and of ye fire worms. I have no idea what that means. Yet it meant something to our ancestors, and so it must have been important. Something tickled at the back of his brain, and he pulled at his nose with his finger and thumb as he thought about it. But then it was gone, something to think about and to consider, he said eventually. In the meantime, there is much for us to discuss, but perhaps later. You look about to drop, old friend. Howland smiled tiredly. I am a little weary, he said in that flat voice that he could put on when he was dissembling a little. Perhaps a little food as well? I think that could be arranged, Ned replied with a smile. And you haven't met Cat for a long time, still less some of my children. Come, let us eat. Jira. The difference between the statue of a young Lyria and Lutepice and the man who now sat opposite him was quite astonishing, he thought as he sipped his wine politely. The wine was superb. The conversation was not. Lutepice was calm on the face of it, but he could tell that there was something else broiling below the surface. Worry, anger, a combination of the two. Varys told me that you were coming to Pentos, Lutepice said eventually, narrowing his eyes at him. To follow the Targaryens, I believe. Jira sipped a little more of the wine and then nodded slightly. The more information I send to King's Landing of their movements, the greater the chance of my pardon. Yes, I heard of your crime. You sold free men to slavers. The words still made his stomach turn over, but he had long practiced now in keeping his face still, something that I have long regretted. How is your wife? More words that made him feel as if there was a cold knife in his guts. I have nothing more to do with her. She lives in Lakesides. Ah yes, the lover of Trigar Ormolin. I hear that she has expensive tastes, and that she is feared by his wife. The cold knife transformed itself into sour vinegar. I no longer have anything to do with her. Now, may I ask what you need from me? The Magister leant back a little and looked at him through hooded eyes. You have certain unique skills. You speak Dothraki, and you have ridden with the savages, and you are of the north, and for the most part, understand their peculiar system of honor. It was the for the most part that rankled. But he nodded slightly again. What do you need those skills for? Lutepice narrowed his eyes again briefly, and then ran a hand over his chin. I require your assistance on 2 riddles. The first is to find out why the Dothraki are all moving east. This surprised him. I thought that you had your own sources of information on the Dothraki. The fat man fidgeted in his seat a little. I thought I had too, he said eventually. But it seems that my sources amidst the Dothraki were not sufficiently adequate to the task of finding out where they were going. And then I remembered that you have friends amongst the Dothraki, including one Loras, I believe. Wazir Lordzian, or perhaps Loras Silverhand, as he will now call himself. A master in Myr made him an artificial hand with many implements. I met him on the road to Pentos. I know that you did, Motides grunted. I would very much like to know if he told you anything about why the Joffrey are heading east. Jera sipped his wine again as he thought very, very hard, and very, very fast. The truth might well be the best way to play this. They are not so much heading east as being drawn there. Or so Loras told me, he said eventually. He said that he could not explain it, but that despite the threat of being executed, if his brother found him, he was still pulled east. To the Dothraki Sea, Vest Dothrak. Beyond that, he said, and he saw how Motapis started a little in surprise at that. To the Grey Waste. The Magister sipped some of his own wine as his forehead creased in thought. The Grey Waste? That makes little sense. Horses die like flies there. He shrugged. That was what Lorson told me. He could not explain it, but he said that the Dothraki all feel what he felt. A short silence fell as Motapis absorbed this. Finally, he nodded sharply. Very well, my thanks. There is something else that I want you to discover. The Company of the Rose is here in Pentos. I had noticed, Jorah replied dryly. They seem to be trickling in. They have arrived in groups, Motapis scowled, and seek passage to White Harbor. They say that their time of exile is over. I would have you find out why. Why now and not when the Targaryens were killed, or driven into exile. I want you to find out for me, Jorah Mormont. For me and for Varys, and your king. He mulled this for a long moment. I shall, he said, eventually. Payment must be progress towards my pardon. I too want to go home. And with that he drained his goblet, nodded politely, and took his leave. A servant escorted him out, and he noted that there seemed to be a guard, one of the Unsullied no less, behind him at all times. He understood when he passed a window into a courtyard and spotted a young man with hair so blonde that it was silver sitting on a bench and crooning over something large and black on the bench next to him. It looked like a large stone, but any further perusal was cut short by the sound of the guard advancing menacingly, so he smiled and walked on. Lyra was waiting for him at the doors when he passed through them, and she stopped looking worried the moment that she saw him. I was concerned about you, she said quietly, as they walked down the hill and into Pentos. That man has a reputation, and an increasingly bad one. He likes to make men and women dance like puppets. And he likes being rich to the point where he will do anything to stay rich. That fitted in perfectly with his own impressions, and he smiled at her. Fear not, I already had part of what he wanted to know. The other half involves a talk with some people from the Company of the Rose. I need to ask some questions that I was already going to ask, to be honest. She peered at him. You want to know why they are going home? Slightly surprised, he nodded. Jorah, you can be a very unsubtle man at times. You have been wondering the same thing yourself. He laughed softly, and then they both wandered down the hill. As they walked, he pondered. Perhaps you could come with me. 4 ears are always better than 2. She looked at him and then smiled. Whatever I can do to help you, I will. They heard the crowd long before they reached it. The square was largely taken up by a great assemblage of people and horses, and as they passed along the edges of it, Jorah felt a great pang of homesickness. It was soon evident that not only had the Company of the Rose kept as much as possible to the clothing of the North, adapted for warmer climes, obviously, but they had also kept their accents. He had no idea how they had managed that, perhaps persistent contact with the North in terms of messengers and merchants, but he was unprepared for how the sound of so many people speaking in the accent of home would affect him. He came very close to crying at one point, but repressed it by blowing his nose and then pretending that the sun had been in his eyes. Not that he had fooled Lyra, who had called his attention to a small plant growing out of a nearby wall that had also allowed him to turn away from everyone and pull himself together. When he turned back, he shot a wry smile at her, and then they both moved on into the crowd. And as they went, the more and more puzzled he became. The Company of the Rose was made up, it seemed, of very sensible people, who knew that the North would be nothing like Essos. Far colder for a start, they did not seem to know where they would all live. Nor did they know how they would live, at first anyway. But they were all sure that they had to go home. It was perplexing. They seemed to trust their leader, however. The Stone, they called him. And some even extended that a little to call him Kratz the Stone. Which confused him because Kratz was not a northern name. There are many in the crowd who had northern names. Jari, Benjen, Brandon, Bran, Jari, Domeric, Rose, Van Roderick, Rickard, Torren. But Kratz was an odd one, perhaps something inspired by Essos, but that also made no sense. The company of the Rose seemed to stick to the old ways and the old names, the old gods too, by the way, that some of them spoke. Naturally, he got drawn into a few conversations here and there. His accent was enough to make people realize that he had been to the north recently, and he was able to pass on a few pieces of advice here and there. The weather, the feel of snow. How important it was to talk to people about when winter arrived. The need for good salt in winter. Little things, but cumulatively important. And they all seemed to agree on one thing, that they were going home for a reason so obvious that they did not need to talk about it. It was almost perplexing, and even Lyra, he could see, was doing her best not to show her puzzlement at the entire thing. Eventually, she wandered off to get some food for them both, and as she did, Jorah strode off to one side to view the entire assemblage. It wasn't a company of the size of others. The Gold Company were far larger, and also far richer. The Second Sons were less rich than the Gold Company, and larger than the Company of the Rose again. They were also currently very badly led. There could be no comparison with the Bloody Mummers, as the latter were composed of the scum of the earth, especially the number of women and children circulating the square. The Bloody Mummers' attitude to women and children could be vile. Then he paused and stared a little harder at the square. Oh, the reports were true. There were women and male in places, and he could see 2 women mock fighting with wooden swords. Interesting. You seem very interested in our company. He looked over and saw a man dressed in brown breeches with a white shirt watching him. He had dark hair and gray eyes, and he reminded him of someone that he could not put his finger on. I have never seen the Company of the Rose before. I have seen many other sellsword companies, but never this one, especially as I am from the north myself. The other man crossed his arms and stared at him. I know that you are Jaya Mormont, once of Bear Island. A chill went through him for a moment. You are very well informed. I am the leader of the Company of the Rose. It is my business to be very well informed. The lives of the men and women in the company depend on it. He eyed the other man carefully. You are the Stone, also known as the Kratz. The other man pulled a slight face. One is a name that became a title. The other will soon be lost. This was odd, and he must have shown this on his face, because the Stone laughed softly. Everything will change when we go home. He peered at Jorah again. I have often wondered what to say if you had sought us out before this day. If you had asked to serve with us before our return, I would have said no. For a moment, Jorah felt that chill again. For what reason? Your crime. You sold free men of the North into slavery. I cannot even describe the magnitude of such a thing. As you know full well, he stared at the sea on the horizon bleakly. Love makes sane men mad. I was in love. I was desperate. I was insane. I committed a terrible crime. I did not come to my senses until afterwards. He remembered that day. Well, bits of it. He had gotten so drunk that Linus had been hysterical with fear that he was going to die. The Stone narrowed his eyes. You regret what you did then? I do, and that was true. Ah, but because it was wrong, or because you were discovered in your crime? That was a good question, and he looked at the Stone sadly. Would it be wrong of me to say both? The other man looked at him closely and then smiled slightly. It would be human of you. None of us are what might wish to be. And your actions since coming to Essos have shown your regret. You have not served with the more revolting, to be honest, sellsword companies, which would have been a problem for many here. Jorah suddenly felt as if he was walking on thin ice all of a sudden. A problem? Your cousins would have been very angry with you, and this baffled him. Cousins? The Stone pointed at the 2 women who had been mock fighting earlier, and who were now waving mugs of what looked like ale at the grinning children around them. The terrible 2, Lydra and Ellis Mormont. Tiny ants seemed to climb up and down his spine. I have cousins here. The Stone seemed to find that very amusing, given his grin. Oh yes, most of the houses of the North have cousins here. Did you forget why we were founded? Why had his father not told him of this? Which houses? The Stone stared out at the crowd. House Mormont, as you know now. House Ammon are the tall group over there. House Karstark. Somewhere in here is a thin-faced man who tells terrible jokes, who is a cousin to that cold streak of piss. Rose Bolton. Jorah stared at them all, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. 2 questions were on his mind. He voiced them both, the first one the most important. Why are you going back to the North? Because we have to. We are drawn there. Did you not hear the call? The call? The distance is great, and some heard it louder than others. It woke me from my sleep and alarmed my wife and children in the process. Others just felt the need to be elsewhere. In the north, it calls to us all. It overrides all other things, all other oaths. The tiny ants on his spine were suddenly joined by a great host. The pull home, the need to be back in the north. I feel it too. I did wonder, but you did not hear the words then? Words? The other man leant forwards a little and his voice became urgent and fierce. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. Shock roiled through him. The others? Stark called for aid. How is this possible? The other man shrugged. He is the Stark in Winterfell. There must be ways of telling these things. It has been a long summer, a very long summer. Winter is coming. Jira ran a hand over his chin and then finally asked the second question. So what house are you? And suddenly he feared the answer. The Stone is my title. My forefathers have led this company from the start. We were the Lodstone for the company. And that became shortened to just the Stone. And as for my name, he looked at Jorah again, his eyes blazing. My first name is Edric. My second name for the time being is Kratz. When I return home, everything will change back to what it was. Think on that for a moment. He did, and then he looked back at the man, his eyes very wide. You are... And then Lyra suddenly arrived, panting from running. Jorah! When she saw the Stone, she paused, rocking on her feet. Your pardon. She strode up to Jorah and then hissed into his ear. I think that Daenerys Targaryen is in the crowd. If she is discovered, there will be trouble. Jorah sighed. Life had suddenly become a lot more complicated. Jaime... Patir Baelish looked, well, as if he was concentrating on something. His eyes were open and fixed on something. Jaime couldn't tell what, not that it mattered. The birds would soon take those eyes. He smirked a little. Baelish had always thought of himself as such a clever fellow. The fact that he had been outsmarted by the likes of Jon Arryn must have smarted a lot. He rode down the hill towards the docks. His fatness was coming back after his unexpected trip to Storm's End. He'd asked Cersei why her husband had taken himself off there, and he'd been answered with a baffled shrug. He woke up shouting something. He was probably drunk, and that had been it. But there had been more to it. He could tell. He could feel something in the air, something that he did not understand and therefore did not like. The small council was busy with so many odd things, ranging from the bizarre, the disappearance of the mountain clans and the word that the Company of the Rose was returning from their long exile, to the amusing the fall of Baelish. It was good that Baelish was dead. Father would probably have had something unpleasant in mind for him had he lived. Trying to cheat a Lannister was unwise. Trying to cheat Father was a death sentence. As he reached the docks, he took a deep breath. Ah, dead fish and sweaty people. Oh, and sewage. The tide must not have turned yet. He sighed, dismounted, and then looked about. He was here to check on the wharf where his fatness was due to dock whenever he turned up, catching sight of the royal wharf or whatever sufficed at the moment. He tied up his horse, gave it a mouthful of oats from a saddlebag, and then wandered along the wooden planks. Yes, it was standing. Seemed serviceable. Didn't appear to have been sabotaged, and wasn't surrounded by a mob of ne'er-do-wells. Just sailors. Speaking of which, he narrowed his eyes a little and then smiled as he saw a familiar face talking to another man. Ah, he called. The most noble knight of onions. Diligent as ever I see. Bible Seaworth looked at him for a moment before finishing his conversation and then turning to face him. Sakraime. He spoke flatly and Jaime had to admit that the man might be baseborn, but he did not seem to be overawed by nobility. He almost liked Seaworth. The man was disgustingly competent, plus his father and Cersei both despised the man, showing that they didn't know everything. What brings you down here? I'm a knight of the Kingsguard, sir, and I never cease to worry about the safety of the king. I'm here to check on the dock where he will dock later. At some point, whenever that is. Seaworth looked at the dock and then stamped on it. Seems stable, as I shall report. Jaime smirked a little and then paused as a bell on the nearby headland clanged 3 times in the distance. When he looked at Seaworth again, he could see that he was staring out to sea with a frown whilst gesturing to one side, Devon. Spyglass, as quick as you can. Aye, father, the young man called as he scurried off before returning with the device. Here you are. Something wrong? Jaime asked. He could see a ship approaching in the distance. Was that the king already? Yaxip, the lookout, signaled that it bears signal flags. He focused the spyglass, and indeed it does. To dock immediately, and that a master is needed. Unease prickled at his scalp for a moment. The crew is ill? Nah, the port orders are very clear on that. A yellow flag is to be flown for pestilence. That ship bears none such flag. He peered again. 'Tis a Dornishman. That intrigued him. How can you tell? Seaworth handed over the spyglass. The foremast is stepped more rakishly, and the sails are a little differently rigged. 'Tis as clear as day. Yozir peered through the spyglass, and then handed it back with a grin. I bow to your greater experience on such matters. He thought about leaving, but then decided to stay. This seemed intriguing. Lucky, too, Seaworth muttered. Wind is set just right for the ship to approach. He paused and stared again. And he's in a right tearing hurry as well? Devon, father, get Maester Darren, and then send word to the harbor master that I shall deal with this matter. My thumbs are pricking. Whoever was handling the ship seemed, in James's admittedly limited experience, to know what they were doing, because the ship approached in a hurry and then slowed in an equal hurry, as the crew reefed various sails at just the right time and then relied on the impetus as well as a few smaller jib sails to carry them into the dock, where various lines were thrown. Well handled, so very well handled indeed, for a Dornishman, Seaworth muttered before he strode along the dock. Jaime followed him curiously. There was a tall, dark-haired man on the quarterdeck who was staring out over King's Landing. The moment he saw them, he started a little and then picked up a speaking trumpet. Ho there! Is that the cloak of a Kingsguard I see? He sounded Dornish. Seaworth glanced at Jaime a moment before filling his lungs and bellowing, Yes, he is. Why? Thank the gods, the man bellowed back, before turning to his men on the main deck. Get that fucking gangplank rigged at once. Then he turned back to them. We need a maester, at once. There's a dying man on board. Seaworth pulled a slight face and then barked at his own men to assist the crew of the ship. As a gangplank was hurriedly rigged to the now stationary ship, followed by a guide rail, we were sent for one. The captain, if a captain he was now on the main deck, and there was no need to shout. The dark-haired man, a Dornishman in every appearance as Jaime saw him more closely, hurried down the wooden surface and then nodded at them both. Myrius, captain of the Seahorse. I am Sir Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight said gruffly, and this is Sir Jaime Lannister of the Kingsguard. Sexily, the captain said quickly, I need witnesses as well as a maester, hence my relief at seeing you, Sex Jaime. I have a dying man aboard who needs to see his son here at King's Landing, and who requires witnesses for the handing over of his ancestral sword. Jane found his eyebrows arching upwards. This all sounded very bizarre. Who is the man? The captain paused, licked his lips, and then said, Lord Osterdane. There was a short, incredulous pause. Lord Axtals and Dane of Starfall? Jaime said the words in some disbelief. Aye, sir. This was baffling. I thought that he had confined himself to his castle, that he was in fact dying. He is desperate to see his son, so he booked passage with us, but did not mention at that he was even ill. The Dornishman looked as if he was about to weep. His son is fostered here, his only child, Edric Dane. Seaworth scowled a little. Why didn't you dock at Dragonstone, or anywhere closer that had a maester? I asked Lord Dane, but he insisted that we press on to King's Landing. Truly, sirs, he was driven to come here. Seaworth and Jaime shared a troubled look. And then the Onion Knight nodded tersely and started to snap out orders that made Jaime wonder if father had briefly possessed the man. A nearby inn had a bedroom requisitioned. Men were to find a litter for Lord Dane. Word was to be passed at once to Lord Stannis Baratheon, who wasn't too far away. Seaworth then looked at the Red Keep and then back at Jaime. Sir Jaime, where might Edric Dane be found? He thought a moment. He is squire to Lord Beric Dondarrion, I believe. He can be found at the Red Keep. He looked at the small crowd behind him that always seemed to grow from nothing, at the drop of a gauntlet, and then he saw the familiar colors of a Lannister guardsman. Do you recognize me? You are Sir Jaime Lannister. The guard looked a little bewildered, but seemed to have a few wits about him. My horse is over yonder. Ride up to the Red Keep at once, and find Edric Dane, squire to Lord Dondarrion, the Lightning Lord. He is to come here immediately. His father, Lord Alster Dane, is here and is very ill. Any questions? None, Sir Yaemi, the guardsman said, looking a little pale. I will go at once, and off he went. By the time that the litter arrived, and Lord Dane finally emerged from his cabin upon it, the crowd was larger, and the moment that he saw Dane's face, he knew that the captain had been right. The Lord of Starfall was pale, almost white. His cheeks were pinched and his eyes sunken. He seemed to be asleep, his chest barely rising and falling. As the litter came down the gangplank, Dane stirred a little and opened his eyes. "Who is there?" His voice was thin and reedy. "You are in King's Landing, Lord Dane," Seaworth said quickly. "We are moving you to the shore. Worry not, your son has been sent for." My thanks. Who are you, Sir?" "Sir Davos Seaworth, Lord Dane. I sail under Lord Stannis Baratheon, the Master of Ships, and this is Sir Jaime Lannister, of the King's Guard. I am honored to meet you both." Then he paused, and his face worked. "Dawn, where is Dawn?" Seaworth looked puzzled at this, but Jaime understood, and was also stunned. "The sword Dawn, Lord Dane. You brought it with you." "I did. Where is it? I must have it. It must be passed to Edric." Jaime looked at Myras, who pointed at the ship. "It must be in his cabin, Cierzi. He would not let anyone touch it on the voyage." Seaworth looked at Jaime, who nodded. "I will get it. I know what it looks like." And he turned and trotted up the gangplank, turned to watch the little party move through the gathering crowd and into the inn, before entering the nearby cabin. The cabin smelt musty, with a hint of herbs. He looked about, and then he saw the sword propped in the corner against a bulkhead. It was the same as he remembered it, when it had been carried by Serapher Dane. He had been a skilled swordsman. Serapher. He had died in Dorne at the Tower of Joy. That mysterious place that Ned Stark never talked about, other than to set his jaw and look even grimmer than usual. He also remembered that Sir Arthur had been very particular, almost peculiar, about the sword. Only he could touch it, not that it ever needed sharpening. He's once asked Sir Arthur if it was Valyrian steel, but he had just smiled slightly and shaken his head. "So very different," he had said. "Dawn is special." Yaxley shrugged and then reached out to pick up the sword by its red leather scabbard. As he did, his fingers touched the hilt, and the sword seemed to shudder and turn in his grip, as if it was a live snake. He dropped it with a stifled oath, and then stared at the thing. What had that been? How could a sword shudder like that? He took a deep and ragged breath, and then looked about the cabin. He could see a cloak in the colors of House Dane to one side, and he grabbed it and then carefully wrapped the sword in it, being careful not to touch it with his bare hands. And then he picked it up and carried off the ship and into the inn. As he entered, he looked about and then noticed Devon Seaworth on the stairs, who caught his eye and then allowed him passage upwards. "I brought the Maester, Sir Jaime. He is with Lord Dane now." He nodded and then saw the elder Seaworth standing by the door to a room. "You have it, then?" "I have it. May I enter?" "Maester Darren is in with him." The door opened suddenly to reveal a short master with a grumpy expression. "Is that bloody sword here?" "Lord Dane is restless without it." "I have it," Jaime said, holding it up. "Shall I bring it in?" "Please do so," the master barked and then vanished within. Jaime crooked an eyebrow and then passed inside. Lord Dane was laid out on a bed, his clothes rumpled and a look of stoic misery on his face as the maester poked and prodded at him. He looked tiredly at Jaime, who unwrapped the sword and then laid it next to him. "Dawn," Lord Dane cried weakly. "My thanks, Sir Jaime. Dawn has been restless of late." The master looked up at this, his eyebrows waggling like caterpillars, before looking back down at his patient. As for Jaime, well, he mumbled something polite and then fled the room, closing the door behind him. He hated seeing a man laid so low, and the sword disturbed him. The two men waited outside the room for a short time, with Jaime trying to think of other things, and then the door opened and the master came out, his face set and grim. "A word, sirs." They both approached him, and he jerked a thumb at the room. "He will not see the sun set. I am heartily sorry, but I am also astonished that he lasted as long as he has. A lesser man would be dead. He is a man driven." Seaworth pulled a face. "He is here to pass the sword on to his son. He thinks of it as his solemn duty. Apparently his son will be the new sword of the morning, whatever that means." Jane stared at the open door, astonished. "'Tis a title borne by members of the Dane family, those deemed worthy to wield Dawn, and those are few enough at times. The last sword of the morning was Sir Arthur Dane. There has not been one since he died, At the end of the rebellion, a memory came to him of the last time he had seen Sir Arthur Dayne. He had been riding in the retinue of Rhaegar Targaryen, and had looked troubled, like a man with a great deal on his mind, and also on his conscience. He often thought about that moment. The Dornishman had seemed like a man repressing tears. Duty can be a terrible master at times, Seaworth rumbled thoughtfully. Lord Dayne needs to see his son very badly. Darren grunted with agreement. The mind, Surays, can be a strange and terrible thing. I think that you are right. His duty is keeping him alive. Once he passes his sword on, I do not think that he will live long. Boots sounded on the stairs, and Jaime looked over to see Stannis Baratheon arrive, with Lord Arryn behind him. He narrowed his eyes for a moment. Those two seemed to be as thick as thieves these days. Sir Davos, Stannis the brooding Baratheon acknowledged. Sir Daemon, we received your message. Is Lord Dayne really here? The hand of the king looked at them, and then his eyebrows flew up at their nods. Is he well? He is dying, my lord, the maester said sadly, but firmly. He has a malady of the blood that is fatal. It cannot be treated, and as I told the good sirs here, I am amazed that Lord Dayne has lived as long as he has. He is driven, my lords, by his need to pass his sword on to his son. The hand of the king's eyes widened. He brought Dawn here to his son? He ran a hand over his chin. Then his son must be the new sword of the morning. Perhaps so, Jaime conceded before cocking an eyebrow at them. He has requested witnesses. Arryn set his jaw and nodded. Then we must honor his request. He walked into the room, followed by the others, and with Jaime bringing up the rear. Once inside, he suspiciously eyed the sword that Lord Dayne was clutching. There was something about it that he almost feared. Who is there? Dayne had his eyes closed, as if in pain. Slowly, he opened them. Ah, Lord Arryn, Lord Baratheon. I am sorry that I cannot stand to greet you. Arryn smiled slightly, and then gently clasped hands with the dying man. 'Tis no matter. Sir Davos and Sir Jaime said that you requested witnesses. We would be honored to be amongst them. My thanks, Dayne said. His breathing seemed a little more labored now. Edric, is he here? Not yet, Stannis Baratheon said in a surprisingly gentle voice. Word has been sent to him. Jaime tilted his head for a moment. He could hear the sound of a galloping horse outside, followed by shouts. After a moment more, boots clattered on the stairs, and Edric Dayne appeared at the doorway. He was a young man with pale blonde hair and eyes that were so blue that they were almost purple. Jaime did not know him well, but had heard that the boy was shy but clever, brave too. He proved that now. He took in the sight of the men in the room and then bowed quickly. My lord hand. Lord Baratheon. Sirs. Then he darted forwards to stand by the bed. Father. Edric, Dayne said with an attempt at a smile. Thank the gods you are here. I am sorry that I look so ill. You must be brave, my boy. You will soon be the Dayne in Starfall. The younger Dayne turned white with shock. Father. No. He shook his head. I am sorry. It cannot be helped. But I had to see you, to explain, and to pass this to you. Only then did Edric Dayne seem to notice Dawn, and to Jaime's bemusement, he seemed to go even paler, if such a thing was possible. Is that Dawn, father? It is. The elder Dayne seemed to rally for a moment. My lord Cierce asked you to witness this moment. Who here will witness it? Arryn stepped forwards. I, Jon Arryn, Lord of the Arry, Defender of the Vale, Warden of the East, and Hand of the King, do witness this. The grumpiest Baratheon cleared his throat. As do I, Lord Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone and Master of Ships. Everyone looked at Jaime next, and he stepped forwards. I, Sir Jaime Lannister, Knight of the Kingsguard, do witness this. And I, Sardathel, Seaworth, do also witness this. Seaworth completed the quartet, and Alster Dayne smiled a little. My Lord Yaxadane, do pass on the sword Dawn to you, Edric Dayne. This is the sword from the stars, a star that fell to earth. It was found by your ancestors and forged into a blade with one purpose, to fight back the night, to fight the others. This is the sword of the first men. He reached out and grasped his son's hand before placing it on the hilt. Edric Dayne stood there, not moving an inch, his eyes very wide, and then he slowly looked down at the sword. When he looked up again, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I accept this sword, he said in a low voice, and the duty that comes with it. Good, said his father weakly. You are worthy of it. I know this. The previous wielder, my own brother, was not, which is why at the end it failed him. You have a great deal to do, but I know that you can do it. Ned, I am so very proud of you, always. Remember that, but there is more. You must go to a Godswood this evening at sunset. There is a pact. Must be renewed. His face worked, and tears spilt down his face. It isn't fair. There is so much I need to tell you, but I have no time left. He fumbled weakly in his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound book and a key. The key is to my solar. There are things there you will need. One day, at least. But the book, I have written the most important things down for you. About Dawn, about what needs to be done. I cannot see far, but the call must be answered. You must go to Winterfell at once. The others come. Everyone stared at the man. Was he raving? But he seemed to be very serious as he gripped his son's arms with thin fingers. Promise me. You must go to Winterfell. I promise, father, I promise. But why? The Godswood, the book, and the sword. They will tell you. He paused. Does night fall already? The shadows fall. I can barely see you. The younger Dane took his father's hand gently as his own tears trickled down his face. Night falls, father. Then there's the last thing. You must know this. And then he pulled his son's head down and he whispered into his ear. Jaime couldn't hear what he said in that long, long minute, but he saw the impact it had on young Ned. He stared in utter shock at whatever it was, and then almost jerked back from his father, only for the older man to take him in an iron grip and then complete whatever he was telling him. Only then did he relax that grip and release his son. Why, I'm sorry that I did not tell you sooner. He smiled weakly, his strength visibly ebbing from him. I failed you in that, but, as I said, I am so very proud of you. He peered around, thorough dull eyes. Is Lord Dondarrion here? I am here, said a sorrowful voice from the doorway, and James started a little as he realized that he had missed the arrival of the Stormlord. Young Ned here galloped ahead of us. Thank you for your letters about Ned's progress, and that you feel he has such potential. Thank you for training him. It has been a pleasure and an honor to finally meet you, Beric Dondarrion said gently. Ned has come far and learned much. Will you please teach him what else he needs? I shall. I do swear it. Ulster Dane smiled once more, and then peered back at his son. Ned, I can't see you. I am here, father. Ned Dane held his father's hand. I am here, and I am so proud to be your son. He looked at his father and then raised his voice again. Lord Arryn? What do you need, Edric Dane? My father has stood his watch as the Dane of Starfall. Is he relieved? Arryn stepped forwards formally. He stands relieved. His duty is done. Thank you. And with those words, Ulster Dane sighed, and then his chest stopped moving. After a long moment, his son reached out and with a trembling hand closed the lifeless eyes. Davos Seaworth cleared his throat and then jerked his head towards the door. My lords, he said in a low voice, we must give the lad a moment. The others nodded, and they filed out as quietly as possible, leaving the boy alone in the room with his dead father. My heiress, who had been hovering in the background, nodded at them all. My lords, good Seeress, my thanks. Lord Dane was a good man. Son Spear will mourn him. I shall take the news myself to Prince Doran. Arryn nodded in recognition and then scratched his head in thought. Signs and portents, he muttered after a long moment. I like this not. What with everything else, I shall write to Ned about this. This surprised Jaime. My lord, surely Lord Dane was not, well, when he claimed that the others had returned. Raving mad with fever dreams was the phrase that he wanted to use, but was not tactless enough to say. The hand of the king looked at him with tired eyes that seemed to burn for a moment. Sir Jaime, things are happening elsewhere in Westeros that make me worried. The old man was losing his mind as well. Oh, well. And then Ned Dane came out of the room holding Dawn. Tears stained his cheeks, but there was a look of such resolve on his face that Jaime straightened as he beheld it. Lord Gian, Arryn said gravely, How can we help? His face worked for a moment, and then he sighed and looked resolute again. My father's body must be returned to Starfall, to rest in the caves with his ancestors. I am Marais, captain of the ship that brought your lord father here, the captain said quietly. It will be my very great honor to take his bones home. Thank you, Captain Miras. Please do so with my thanks. He seemed to brace himself. And I must go to Winterfell, as my father asked me to. Lord Dondarrion? Yes, Lord Dane. I have learnt much, but as my father said, there is more I need to know. Will you teach me a little longer? As long as you need. Thank you, he said softly. Then he placed his hand on the hilt of Dawn again. We are needed. Yaksa, something was going on with Jon. She could feel it. True. There were all the other things, like Great Jon Umber being in Winterfell, whom she liked very much, especially when he told rude jokes without thinking and made Mother close her eyes in despair whenever she saw Erdir taking notes on them. And then there had been Father the other night, who had apparently rode out in the middle of the night with his eyes on fire. When he had come back the next day, his eyes then returned normal, but there had been a dire wolf by his side. A dire wolf? It was all so exciting. She paused as she crossed the courtyard that led to the crypts. No, Mother was nowhere to be seen, which was good. She didn't want to be told how to embroider bits of cloth. She wanted to be out with Bran and Domeric, learning how to ride. A scowl crossed her face. She almost liked Domeric. He may be someone who played the harp a lot, but he was also someone who could ride a horse like a hero of legend and also use a sword. No one in sight still, so she darted across the courtyard and into the doorway that led to the stairs down. No, everyone was being odd these days. Everyone apart from her, of course, and Rickon. Robb spent half his time muttering over books and the other half drilling in fighting techniques like a veteran. Something had changed in him. He seemed harder in some ways. Isin was gaunt-eyed and seemed to have changed in other ways. He seemed less prickly and proud and more helpful. He certainly seemed to like helping with the archery lessons. Sansa, she rolled her eyes and almost lost her footing as she went down the steps. Well, she was busy mooning over Domeric, and Bran was still sulking, more than a bit over not being allowed to climb the wall of Winterfell. Father had made him swear not to, had made him swear in ice, which was odd. And then there was Jon, who seemed burdened by something that he wasn't telling anyone. Not even her, and who often disappeared into the crypts when he thought that no one was watching. Like now. She came to the end of the stairs, orientated herself, and then padded along as quietly as she could. There were torches up ahead, and she kept to the shadows. There he was. He was placing flowers at the foot of one of the statues, and then he sat down and stared up at the face of the statue, and she heard him mutter something too softly for her to make out. Wait, she knew that statue. It was Aunt Lyanna, who had died long before she'd been born. She scowled again. Time for some answers. Why are you here? Jon actually started with surprise, and she smirked a little at her skills at creeping. Erdia! Jon, she walked up to him and then crossed her arms and directed her best glare at him. In the crypts again, I see. He eyed her a little warily. Very observant of you. Why are you down here? What's wrong? She put all of her annoyance and frustration into her voice. You're not brooding again, are you? I thought Mother was being nicer to you these days. He just looked at her and then smiled a little. Brooding a little, perhaps? Horror roiled her. No. There could be only one reason for his brooding, and Mother cheering up. No, she said fiercely. You're not going to. I say so. So there. He blinked at her. Not going to what? Leave Winterfell and join the Night's Watch. I forbid it. And she stamped her foot to show her resolve. When Jon just smiled at her, this made her even more bewildered and angry. Jon Snow? Peace. Jon said, as he threw up his hand in surrender. I am not joining the Night's Watch. I swear it on our ancestors. And then something odd happened to his face. A mixture of emotions washing over it. And soon my name will not be Jon Snow anymore. She stared at him as if he was mad. What? He looked around and then finally back at her. Keep this to yourself, Arya. But Father has written to King Robert about me. Puzzled, she sat down by him and crossed her legs. About what? About my name, Jon said gently. Father has asked that I be legitimized. She stared at him, hope warring with bafflement. You mean you would be Jon Stark, he said, the words with a smile, but there was something in his eyes that she did not understand. I will be a Stark of Winterfell. Rosio rolled her eyes at him. Silly, you've always been a Stark. That odd look came into his eyes again. Some would disagree, he said bitterly. Mother's wrong about that, she replied carefully. Then she scowled. And about me and embroidery. Stupid thing. I'd much rather learn to ride with Bran and use the bow. I know you would, Jon said with a grin. You're a better archer than Bran is already. He shook his head. The old gods help the man you marry. She stuck her tongue out at him. Long time ahead of me before that, she muttered. And besides, who says that I have to marry? You're a Stark of Winterfell, Jon reminded her gently. Father might allow you to choose, but you will have to marry eventually. And then he looked back at the statue of Aunt Lyanna. Although fate takes us along odd paths. She nodded a little and then frowned. Why are you here again? And why the flowers? He gestured at the statue. It's her birthday, he said quietly. Did you know that? Ariel looked at the statue to Father's only and beloved sister. She'd heard the tales, listened to the stories, felt the sadness in Father's voice when he spoke of his sister and his eldest brother and his own father. None of whom she had ever met, heard the tale of the great rebellion that resulted from the actions of the Mad King and his mad son, and she knew that Father had loved Aunt Lyanna very much. I didn't know that, she told him with some sorrow in her voice. I really didn't. I thought that someone should remember, Jon replied. Father comes here on the anniversary of when she died, but not, I think, on her birthday. I think that it pains him a great deal to think of her. They sat there in the crypts for a long moment before Arya finally nodded and stood up. I'm hungry, and it must be almost noon. You'll come up, won't you? I will, little sister. She looked at him again, her head tilted slightly to one side. You haven't called me that in weeks. That thoughtful, almost booting look came and went on his face for a moment. I had a lot on my mind, and then he smiled a smile that didn't completely reach his eyes. She smiled back and then walked back towards the stairs. Her brother was keeping a secret. She liked a challenge, but then, as she walked along, she saw a door where there had never been one before. Jon? What is it? Where does this door go? I've never seen it before. What door? He stood and paced over to her, before staring in bafflement at the door. It was made from stone, or so it looked like, and it was open the merest crack. Arya walked over to it hesitantly, and then peered at the surface of it. Reaching out, she brushed a thick layer of dust off it to reveal a carving of a direwolf superimposed on a man's face. We need to tell Father, they both whispered at the same time in awe. Daenerys, it was all so exciting. So many people who spoke as they did in Westeros. So many beautiful horses. So many women and children. She felt as if she was in a small corner of the land she was exiled from. She didn't remember Dragonstone. She'd been just a baby when she had been spirited away from the island with Viserys, but she remembered dear old Sir Willem Darry, with his accent. The men and women around her had a similar accent, not exactly the same, but like enough to make her think that if she closed her eyes a moment, she might be back across the narrow sea. It was almost intoxicating. She bound her hair back and found a cloak with a cowl. It was a bit too large for her, and some might find it a bit too hot in the sun, but not her. She was too excited. They were going home, and she envied them a little. The more she thought about it, the more she did not know, not truly know, where she would call home. She missed the house with the red door of her youth. Unlike Viserys, she did not miss King's Landing, because she had never been there. Neither had most of the company of the Rose to Westeros, that is, and yet they were so keen to go home. The more she thought about the less that she understood it. Mind you, she didn't understand some of the food either. She was staring at some now. It looked like a cooked tube of pastry the length of her hand, with minced pork and green flecks in it. It's a sausage roll, said a voice to one side, and she looked over to see a tall man with thinning hair looking at her. He was dressed like many of the men around them, like a man of Westeros, but whereas there was excitement in their eyes, there was a tiredness in his, leavened with a look of distracted thought. They tend to vary in quality, but that one looks quite tasty. She said cautiously. Then she pointed at a different food, a pastry half-moon with the round edges crimped. And that, a pasty. It's a northern delicacy. Why is one side crimped like that? It was made for miners and those that work on buildings. They often had dirty hands and needed something that could eat that had a rim. They'd eat the main part, but not the rim. I see, she said, and then looked about the square again. She could tell that the other man was looking at her carefully and had now joined her in looking about. A moment later, she heard a woman's voice call out gaily, "There you are!" And then a woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, dressed like an SOC, strode up to her with a basket filled with food. "I wondered where you had got to. You shouldn't stray too far. The maester said that you are still recovering. Now then, say Jorah, and I will take you back up the hill to the Magister's place. You've had quite the visit, little sister. We can't risk you getting any sicker." She opened her mouth to protest that she had no idea what the woman was talking about, when all of a sudden the woman linked her arm through hers with a deft speed and then half pulled, half encouraged her along. As she did, she babbled endlessly about the pretty dress that she had seen, about how the Company of the Rose was going home, about how pale she was after being so ill, and how the maester had said that her hair would soon return to its natural blonde color. The man who had talked to her, Ser Jorah, walked next to them. She could see that she was being led along the road that indeed led to the Magister's mansion, and she wanted to protest again that she did not know them, but some instinct was suddenly screaming in her ears that she should go with them, that she was not safe. Ser Jorah would occasionally make a comment, and once said that he had spoken to Lord Krotzen that the leader of the Company of the Rose had agreed that he should escort her back up the hill. Only then did she see the men who stopped following them abruptly, hands on daggers and suspicion in their eyes. They all looked at one man, who shook his head, and then they dispersed. Once they were far enough away from the square and the crowd, only then did the woman gently unhook their arms and smile at her a little more coolly. "That might have been eventful," Ser Jorah rumbled as they strode up the hill. "Daenerys Targaryen, I presume? You were being followed by men who suspected that you were not what you seemed." She looked at the two with some suspicion of her own. "How did you know who I am?" "You should have tied your hair back with a better tie," the woman said, and she realized that some of her hair had indeed escaped its bond and was peeking out from the hood. "And the cloak you are wearing is of very rich material. Too expensive for anyone but a noble. The more you walked about, the more that you were suspected." She found herself drooping a little. "My thanks, I thought that I had been so careful. And you are?" "Vladimir. This is Ser Jorah Mormont." "Mormont, you serve with the Company of the Rose?" He smiled a little and then shook his head. "Nay, I am of the North, but not of the Company. There, I was trying to find out why they are being drawn home." "Why are they going home?" He paused a moment. "'Tis a complicated story to explain. Let me just say that they have good reason. A call has gone out. The North pulls the first men." She stared at him a moment. "A pull to the North? A slight tug?" He looked at her oddly. "In my case, a violent yank. But how should you? Of course. You have Blackwood blood in you. You feel it a little." "Why didn't you go there?" Lyra broke in. "That was dangerous for you." Dany shrugged a little. "I wanted to talk to people who were from Westeros. See what they sounded like, looked like. I know that they are exiles, but so am I. And I don't remember home." She was babbling and then she straightened up. "I was not in any danger, not really." The other two stared at her and then at each other. "Lady Daenerys, Princess Daenerys, you were in danger. The men of the North, even those far removed from it, do not love Targaryens. The Company of the Rose came to Essos because they would not bend the knee to Aegon Targaryen, and these days they hate them even more, especially since the Mad King killed the Starks in his throne room." She stared at him. "I do not know what you are talking about. What Mad King? Which Starks?" This time the other two stopped in their tracks and stared at her, before exchanging a long gaze. "Does she jest?" Lyra asked with what sounded like astonishment in her voice.
What's...
She was about what? She was in danger of losing her temper. "Tell me, what Mad King?" "Your father." Ser Jorah said the words, and as he did, a chill of shock went through her. In his last months, all of Westeros called him the Mad King for his crimes. Even in Makar, we heard about them. Lyra muttered, looking a little ill. "My father was not mad," Dainty protested. "The people loved him. He was betrayed and murdered by the usurper." "The people?" "The people called him King Scab at first. The Iron Throne was made from dragon-melted swords. But those swords are still sharp in places, and your father kept nicking himself on them, King Scab, who saw traitors everywhere, and as the years passed then the more traitors he saw and the madder he became." She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a finger in the air and then pointed at her. "Do you know why the North rose as one man to follow Ned Stark, the second son of Lord Rickard Stark, even though he was the second son?" She shook her head, bewildered. 'Cause your father killed his father and elder brother. I don't understand, she whispered. Why? Sierra Jara and Lyra stared at her as if she was mad. You do not know. All I know is what my brother told me, that my father was let down by fools and weak-willed men on his council, that he was betrayed. He mentioned once that Lord Stark, the elder Stark, had been a traitor, but he never mentioned him again. Sir Jorah was now pale, with what seemed to be shock, whilst Lyra was clutching at his arm. What do you know of your brother, Rhaegar? He asked, the words thickly, as if he could not trust his mouth. That he was knightly and noble. He kidnapped Lyanna Stark, the daughter of Lord Stark and the sister to Brandon and Eddard Stark. Willingly or not, on her part, we do not know. But they both vanished, and her brother Brandon Stark rode to King's Landing to demand to know where they were. Your father did not like that. He threw Brandon Stark in a cell, calling him traitor. Then he wrote to Lord Rickard Stark, demanding ransom for his son and commanding him to come to King's Landing as well. He said the words stonily, and dread flickered in her heart. What happened? Your father announced that Rickard Stark was also a traitor. Lord Stark demanded a trial by combat. Your father granted his wish. When fully armored, he arrived in the throne room of the Red Keep. Your father announced that he had chosen a champion to fight him, Fire. She blinked. I have never heard of a Lord Fire, and I thought that all the Blackfires were dead. There was pity in the look he now directed at her. Not a man. Fire as in the element. Lord Stark was suspended in his armor from the rafters, and Aerys had his pyromancers build a fire beneath him, which was then lit, and as Rickard Stark burnt to death, Brandon Stark watched it all with a sword just out of reach and a special collar around his neck. The more struggled to reach the sword, the more the collar tightened. Your father's orders, all of it. And that is why the North will never follow a Targaryen, and that started the rebellion. Gainsy's stomach turned over and she felt her skin go cold and clammy. No, she choked eventually. No, Lyra looked at her and gasped, but it was too late. She darted to one side of the road and then fell to her knees and voided her stomach. No, she said again, when she was able to, through a burning throat and a haze of tears. I don't believe it. I can't. The Northman was standing to one side and looking abashed. I am sorry, he said hesitantly. I should have found a less blunt way to tell you, but you had to know. I am sure that your brother has his own version. Laura reached into her basket and pulled out a stone jar with a cork sealing it. She pulled it open and handed it to her. She took it with a shaking hand and drank from it. It was some kind of water flavored with lemon and sugar, and it was delicious. Thank you, she said huskily, before standing again, and I do not believe you. Ser Jorah and Lyra looked at her and then looked at each other before shrugging. Ask anyone you like about the events of the rebellion. Apart from your brother, Lyra said flatly. They walked back the hill in silence, dainty and rather shaky legs. As they reached the mansion, she could see that the doors were open, and then Magister Motapis was watching them. He had a look of carefully hidden irritation at her. Princess, he rumbled, I was about to send people out to search for you, but I see that this good sir has found you. She was in the square where the company of the Rose were assembled. Lyra here saw her and also saw that there were some there who were viewing her with some suspicion. So we, with the approval of Lord Crax, the leader of the company, got her out of there with a small stratagem. It worked. My thanks, the Magister said, and then he looked at her more closely. Princess, you seem upset. Her thoughts were in a jumble. I did not think that I was in any danger. I know that I was wrong now. Your pardon, Magister. Ser Jorah, Lyra, my thanks. And then she walked to her room. She had a great deal to think about, and she wanted to be sick again at the thought of her father and the things that he had allegedly done. Jorah, he watched the child go and mentally shook his head. The Targaryen girl had just had some of her illusions shattered, and he had been the person to do it. Well, it had to be done. The gods alone knew what other rubbish her brother had poured into her head. Motapis tilted his head at him. Thank you for finding her. Lyra concealed a slight scowl at being ignored, and then stepped back as the Magister gestured at Jorah to step closer. You said that you spoke to Kratz. What did he say? Jorah thought deeply for a long moment. He said something most odd, that they were going back to the north because they had heard a message, a call from the north. What message? From whom? Winterfell, or so Kratz thought. As to how it was delivered, he said that he came awake in the middle of the night, with the words ringing through him. Words? The others come, the Stark calls for aid. You are needed. Motipi stared at him as if he was mad. The others? They return because of a legend. They seem certain of it. I shall return to talk to them again. They plan some ceremony this evening. He paused, assessing his next words. Coming after what I heard about the Dothraki. Magister, something has changed in this world. The Company of the Rose feel a pull back to the north, a need to be there, and I also feel it. I have for many days now. The Magister's stare changed slightly. It was still intent, but there was more considered thought behind it now. Curious, he muttered after a long moment. Word has come from Old Town. The glass candles can be relit. He heard a gasp from behind him, and he turned to see that Lyra had both hands over her mouth in shock. She noticed his look and then blushed a little and ducked her head in apology. Not that Motipi seemed to notice. Instead, he seemed to be so deep in thought that nothing could possibly make him notice anything. And then he seemed to return from wherever his mind had taken him. This changes everything, he muttered. Then he paused. If it's all true, that is, the Grey Waste means the 5 forts, and then he cut himself off, nodded at Jorah, and then turned and walked back into his mansion. Calling over his shoulder, I will send word to Varys. Jorah watched him go, and then turned to Lyra. Feel like another walk down the hill? A little exercise never did anyone any harm, she replied, with a smile, and then she linked arms with him, and they walked back down the road. Where did you get the food? I wanted to get something for supper. Good that I did. He frowned and then shook his head. Her brother never told her. The swine. He is a Targaryen, Jorah. The dragons always held themselves to be above all overs. He remembered the aftermath of the Trident, and then the Red Keep afterwards. The bodies being brought from the Black Cells. The tales of Aerys and his last days of insanity and barbarity, the burning alive of anyone who crossed him, the torture and the mindless cruelty, we are well rid of them. She peered at him worriedly, and then they passed down the road to the square. There they found that the crowd was now quieter and also organized into groups that formed a great circle, each group having a furled flag. There was a tension in the air now, something that he could almost taste. Lyra tightened her grip a little on his arm, but stood next to him. Your cousins wish you two to stand with them, said a voice to one side, and he noticed that the stone was standing to one side, leading a horse and holding a furled flag himself. Behind the horse stood a younger version of the stone, along with a woman who looked like his wife and 4 other children of varying size. When you are with them, we shall begin. Jorah looked around in some confusion, but then walked with Lyra over to where the women that the stone had pointed out to him were waiting. They seemed to be amused, irked, and expectant all at the same time. Cousin, one of them, Lyra, said. Well met. Then she frowned. We have much to talk about. You resemble our grandfather, by the way. She spoke with such an intensity and with such a look of wry and angry humor that he was instantly reminded of Mecca, and all of a sudden he wanted to hug her and weep for what he had lost. However, she'd probably box his ears and tell him not to be a great dunderheaded fool, so he restrained himself and instead looked back to the stone, who was walking with his horse and his family to the center of the circle. There he took the furled flag from his son and grounded its spiked base next to his foot. We are the Company of the Rose, the stone cried in a loud voice, with our kith and kin. We are the sons and daughters of those who did not bend the knee to the dragons. We are those who remember the vow made by our ancestors. We remember, for many long years, who have remained here in Essos, as was agreed. This was interesting, Jorah thought. Agreed by whom? But now everything has changed. We have heard the call home. The call from Winterfell. The others come. We all know it. We all feel it. The crowd rumbled in agreement and approval. I know that we are bound by the oath that our ancestors swore, but there is an older oath that we must obey. An older calling. We are of the North. We must always rally there when the call comes to fight the long night, to fight the oldest enemy of our people. How could we not? How could any man or woman of the North fail to rally against such a threat? Could I? No. Could you? No, the crowd bellowed back, and Jorah was startled to find that he had shouted too. Lyra looked at him and then wiped the tears from his face with a quick finger and a fond smile. Then we must return home. Who will go with me? Who will heed the call? Which of the houses who sent their exiles to the east will return? He turned to face the various groups, and then raised a hand to the one in front of him. Will you? House Bolton will! House Serwyn will. House Glover will come. House Karstak too. And House Hornwood. House Mormont will answer the call. Elise bellowed, leaving his ears ringing a bit and reminding him again of Megan. House Redstark will follow. Jira jerked his head at that. House Redstark? Where had they come from? And House Ryder! And that shook him like nothing else. Where had they been hiding? There hadn't been a rider in the north since the arrival of the Targaryens. And then he started to wonder again about how this company had been founded. Then he drew his attention back to the square. A few other houses had announced that they were going, and then a tall man with 3 tall sons and 2 tall daughters stepped forwards. And House Umber, we too will answer the call. The stone looked about the square, and Jorah could see the shining tracks of tears on his face. And my house, too, he rumbled, before raising his voice again. We name ourselves true again, House Stark returns home. And then he unfurled the banner and shook it a little so that the wind could catch the cloth. The direwolf caught the breeze and boomed and snapped, as did the other banners as the men and women bearing them lifted them in the air. There was a moment of silence, and then the cheering started. Someone slapped Jorah on the back, and he smiled as he wiped the tears from his cheeks. Why was he crying? Why did he feel so home with a group of strangers, even if some of them were kin? Was it the fact that he felt what they all did? When he was finally able to, he turned to see Lyra looking at him with a smile of her own and also eyes filled with tears. You are going back with them, aren't you? Lyra said in his ear. He frowned and then nodded. If I can get passage with them, yes. Jack saw. It will be dangerous. I have to go. I am drawn there. Drawn home, like they are. I will risk it. She peered at him with large eyes. Then she nodded as if she had seen something in his face that made up her own mind. Very well, I shall go with you. Share your risk and face your fate with you. He opened his mouth to protest. But she laid a finger over his lips. This is not something we will debate. I have decided it. He looked at her for a long moment and then he pulled her to him and kissed her fiercely, hearing his cousins cheer him on with a number of rude comments. And he felt something that he had not sensed within him for some time. Hope. Arya. The brands guttered and flared as Father and the others approached the door. She had run to fetch Father as fast as her legs could take her, leaving Jon in the crypt. When she returned, having run ahead of the others, Jon hadn't moved a muscle, still staring at the door. Father stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the door, forcing the others behind him to slow a little. When he started walking again, he could see that he must have summoned a lot of people after she'd burst into his solar and gabbled that he had to come to the crypts at once, as she and Jon had found a door that they had never seen before, with a direwolf carving. She could see Robb behind Father and Mother. Master Luwin was there, and Demeric the Greatjon too, and then bringing up the rear was Theon and a bright-eyed and inquisitive Bran. They all came to a halt before the door and stared at it. I see that you were right, Father said, eventually, before smiling at them both wryly. Well done. Rosier, why were you down here? Mother asked with more than a little curiosity combined with exasperation. She rolled her eyes for a moment. Avoiding septimording would be the wrong thing to say, even if it was accurate. Getting out of stupid embroidery was another accurate answer. I was looking for Jon, she said eventually. I saw him come down here. Everyone looked at Jon, who looked back at Father evenly. Today is Aunt Lyanna's birthday, Father. I lit a candle in her name, in front of her statue. Father closed his eyes for a long moment. He said eventually, in a thick and regretful voice. I'd forgot that. He opened his eyes, and there was approval in them now. You did right by your aunt. Good lad. And then he shook himself a little and stepped closer to the door. Now this is interesting. I have never seen this here before. I wonder how long it has been open. Robb stepped forwards and joined their father as they examined. Then something seemed to strike him. Father, the night of the direwolf, you vanished. When you were possessed by our ancestor. When I saw you next, you were coming up from the crypts, from here. What if Edric Stark knew of this place and how to open the door? Father seemed to think about this for a moment and then nodded. That might well be it. Then he reached out and pulled on the door. It didn't move. Frowning, he handed his brand to Robb and pulled with both hands. It still didn't move. Oh, in the name of the old gods, Ned, give over. Let me have a go. And the great John stumped over, gave his brand to Arya with a smile, and then braced himself and hauled on the door. Something groaned, either the great John or the door frame, and then there was a grating noise as the big man forced the door open. Once it was fully open, he released it and then turned back to Father. "There you go, Ned," he panted. "Needs a little oil, though." Father grinned at his old friend, and then he seemed to sober himself as he took back his brand from Robb before stepping up to the doorway. And then he seemed to take a deep breath and stepped forwards into the dark room beyond. As the others also followed him, Arya squirmed with impatience, before finally squeezing in through the door at the same time as Bran, who protested vehemently. And then they both fell silent and still as they saw what was in front of them. There were tombs lining the sides of the room. Pairs of tombs, in fact. And statues, too, also in pairs. Man and direwolf. Women, too. Everyone stared around the dark, dusty room in some shock. "By the gods," Theon said eventually. He was staring at one of the statues intently. Then he bent down and brushed the dust from a carving at the foot of the statue, before straightening and then stepping back in what looked like shock. "Lord Stark, this is Edric Stark's tomb. He and his dire wolf, Thorn, he died 1,000 years ago." Father strode over and peered at the carvings. Then he looked around at the tombs, and there was an odd look to his face. "Wards," he said, eventually. "The legends were true. The Starks were wards." "Aye, Father," Robb said quietly. Then he looked at Father. "But are we still wards?" Rosier felt her eyes widen. "Wargs? Men and women who could step into the minds of animals. And dire wolves, too." She shifted from foot to foot quickly, and then she looked around the room. Robb looked almost wistful. Jon looked thoughtful, as did Bran. The great Jon looked stunned, whilst Demeric looked almost happy. Odd. Luwin's face was a picture of concentration, and Mother, well, she looked shocked and more than a little resigned. Also a little green for some reason. She wondered why, and then she caught sight of a statue of a woman with a dire wolf just to one side and darted over to it, rubbing on the inscription to read the name. "This one's Daisy Stark, and her dire wolf Huntress." She looked about the room in delight, and then she paused. "Father, why did they hide this place?" By the look on Father's face, he did not know. Yet, Brynden, anyone who had ever lived in the Riverlands or the Vale, was well acquainted with rain. But that didn't mean that he had to like it. Brynden looked up at the sky sourly, and then pulled the hood of his oiled campaign cloak a little further down so that the rain would hopefully stop dripping on his nose, and not for the first time blessed old Sir Dalbert, the man who had given it to him so many years ago. A seemingly trivial thing, but he had cared for it over the long years, and it had kept him dry. He thought back to the War of the Ninepenny Kings for a moment, and then snorted a little. Had it really been so long ago? The rain eased a little, and he looked at the road ahead. Where was he going? West. Why was he going southwest? He didn't bloody know. He wondered how much of a mess his successor was making. As the Knight of the Gate and shuddered a little, hopefully Aaron had appointed someone competent, which brought the issue, again, of why he was going southwest. He still didn't know. The road wound through a wood, and he watched the trees cautiously. There was the occasional problem with idiots, with blunt swords who thought that they could rob people. His brother tended to make object lessons of them. Then he paused a moment. Speak of the devil. There were 2 bodies on the side of the road ahead, both with crude weapons next to them, or what remained of them. The old swords looked as if something had shattered them, and the men looked as if what had shattered their swords had been a far better and sharper sword. He nodded in satisfaction. Good, clean strokes. The rain lifted as he passed through the far end of the little wood, and he peered at the horizon. The great bulk of Harrenhal was off to his right, and he winced a little as he looked at it. He disliked that place. There was indeed something cursed about it. He rode on, glancing up at the sky and assessing the sun. It was going down, and at some point he'd have to think about where to sleep. The last inn was far behind him, and he didn't know where the next one was. This wasn't a big road, nor a busy one. He'd normally make do with sleeping under a tree wrapped in his cloak. But judging by the cloud with a curtain of rain beneath it on the horizon, that might not be a good idea tonight. An hour later, he was sure that he needed shelter. It was going to be a wild and wet night by the flash of lightning ahead. Longshanks was a pretty stoic horse, but he didn't want him too spooked by the bad weather. And then, as dusk started to fall, as well as a fine drizzle, He saw the great bulk of a crag to his right, and beneath that crag the light of what looked like a fire. He narrowed his eyes a little, remembering the bodies that lay far behind him, and then shrugged a little. If they were willing to share the fire, then he could bring food. If they were not, he could find another place. And if they eyed his possessions and then tried to rob him, then he'd provide a messy object. Lesson. As he approached the fire, he dismounted, and as he led Longshanks along, he noticed a few things. The fire was in the mouth of what looked like a south-facing cave, one with enough of an overhang of rock over it that it was sheltered from the rain, and there was a figure there, standing behind the fire. A tall man, cloaked and hooded, but with one hand on the pommel of a longsword. He was peering at Brynden suspiciously. He sighed and stopped, before raising his free hand. "Who there? I saw your fire, and with your leave would share it. 'Tis a foul enough night, and I have food I can share, bread and salt for a start." The figure seemed to relax a hair at the mention of bread and salt, and then nodded slowly. As Brynden approached, he could see that the cave was a deep one, and that there was a horse tethered at the far end, its nose in a nosebag. "May I tether my horse at the back?" Brynden asked. The figure nodded again, and he led Longshanks into the cave. It was roomier than it first appeared, and also drier. Someone had hammered spikes into the rock face at the back at some point, and then attached metal rings to tether horses, and he chose the one furthest away from the other horse. He unsaddled Longshanks and then pulled out a blanket and rubbed him down carefully, before hanging up the wet blanket over two of the rings on the wall. Then he pulled out the old familiar horse blanket, draped it over Longshanks, clinched it just tight enough, and then watered and fed him. And all the time he could feel the eyes of the other man on his back. Finally finished, he shouldered his saddlebags and then strode over to the fire, where he sat to one side of his suspicious fellow traveler. Reaching into one of his bags, he pulled out a piece of clean cloth, which was wrapped around the fresh bread that he'd bought that morning from the inn he'd stayed at. He pulled a piece off it, sprinkled some salt onto it from a little pouch that he always carried, broke the bread in half again, and then handed it over to the other man. "Bread and salt," he said, before eating it. "Bread and salt," said the other man, and then ate his piece. There was something odd about his voice. The accent hinted at the Stormlands, and the voice seemed growly, but as if it was being projected lower than was usual. "Thank you." And then the other man turned to look at the fire. Brynden nodded slightly, and then dug into his bag again, before finally pulling out a wrapped pack of cold but cooked sausages. He then pulled out his old campaign skewer, with its wooden handle, fastened a pair of sausages on the tines, and then held the skewer just above the nearest flames. The other figure watched in silence and then dug into the bag next to him and pulled out a small stone jar, which he opened and placed to one side. Brynden looked into it. "Mustard," he nodded. "A trade, then? A sausage for some mustard." The other man nodded and then sniffed as the smell of hot sausage started to grow. Brynden watched them critically and then pulled back the skewer before they had a chance to burn. The other man nodded and then teased one of them off with a small knife that he had pulled from the bag. A little mustard was applied from the jar, and then Brynden bit into his... Not bad. His flask contained some watered wine, and he took a pull on it before placing another 2 sausages on the skewer, and then putting the rest away. They'd last until tomorrow. Then he warmed the sausages whilst thinking about the other man. Whoever he was not keen on showing his face. The cloak was good quality. The gloves, too. From what he could see of the sword, it too was well made. And the gilding back there was fit, well cared for, and might have had a splash of Dornish blood in it. But whoever he was, he seemed keen to hide his face. Who was he? The other 2 sausages were eaten, and then he replaced everything in his bag. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and he looked out at the night. "I'm glad I'm not out there tonight." There was a grunt in answer. There was also a whinny from the back of the cave, and he sighed. If the storm got any closer, then he'd have to see to Longshanks. That horse got skittish when it thundered too much, and would need soothing. He looked back at the fire, and then thought. The question of where in the name of the gods he was going was nagging at him again. Was this all a fool's folly on his part? He had given up being Knight of the Gate. And for what? A fancy, a restlessness. He could not explain, a need to be somewhere than he was right now. The thunder growled again, louder, and he sighed and then stood. "My horse hates thunder," he muttered, and then stalked back to Longshanks. The horse whickered at him, and he stroked his nose and soothed him, as if he needed reminding that his master was still in the area. He'd be fine now. He stalked back to the fire and sat. The rain was pounding down outside now. Longshanks gets nervous at thunder. He'll be fine now. The head of the figure jerked up at that. Longshanks. Huh. I had thought I had seen you before once, from a distance. You are the Blackfish. That voice was intriguing him now. It was low-pitched, but was a little higher than before. He peered at the figure. I am Sir Brandon Tully, the Knight of the Gate. There was some admiration there, and then he had it. He was ashamed. I am not now. She tilted her head, and he saw a flash of bright blue eyes. Why not? He stroked his beard carefully as he thought of his answer. I was called away, and still called away, by something I cannot explain. I am following a pole to the southwest. He smiled awkwardly. That sounds foolish. I know, but it nags at me, especially the words from a dream. The woman had straightened as he had been speaking, and she now pulled her hood down and stared at him in what looked like some astonishment. She was not a pretty and could be described as homely at best, with short, straw-colored hair, a wide mouth, and a nose that seemed to have been broken at least twice. But her eyes, now there was something to behold. Large and blue, and with something that seemed to blaze in them. She reminded him of someone, but he could not put his finger on who. You are pulled southwest? On this road? Since when? A month at least since I heard the call. He peered at her sharply. You too? Hey, 'twas a dream in the night. I was traveling home from business for my father in the Vale when I heard a whisper, and then a pull towards something that I cannot explain. Southwest? Aye. Then perhaps we should travel together, he paused. I saw 2 dead bandits on the road some miles back there. She snorted. Fools who saw a woman on a horse and did not think that I could defend myself. I corrected their mistake. As was right. She eyed him again. I will ride with you, Blackfish. I am Brienne of Tarth. Well met, Brienne of Tarth. He paused. I have met your father, the Evenstar, a good man. He taught me all he knew. Brynden smiled and then nodded. Do you want to take the first watch or the second? The first. Then, good night, and wake me for the second. And then he wrapped himself in his cloak, laid his head on a saddlebag, and fell asleep in an instant. Jon Arryn. The figures were cold and bleak, and they told a terrible story. And there were so many of them. He sighed at the thought of what they entailed, and then rubbed at his forehead. He could feel a headache start to build. Ah well, he'd live. There was far, far too much to do. Fingers drummed for a moment on the desk, and he looked over to see that Stannis had finished his own perusal of the latest book that had emerged from the secret stash of such books in the possession of the late and thoroughly unlamented Petyr Baelish. Drowning was too good for him, Stannis said in a voice that was tight with fury. He deserved more than that. I know, Jon said with a sigh, but he is dead enough. Now we must clear the rubble and build anew. He stood with a slight wince as various bones protested, and then walked to the nearest window and stared out at the morning sun. A tap at the door, and Quill poked his head in. Your pardon, my lords, but Jamsley is here as you ordered, and I have the forms that you also asked for. Excellent. Thank you, Quill. Please keep an ear out in case we need those forms. Hopefully they wouldn't. Slentu was a fool and a coward. The man himself stamped in, looking as always like a plump fool who knew everything. Not today. Ah, Slint, Jon said as he returned to his desk and then looked at the commander of the Gold Cloaks. Are you well? Slint, who looked rather more like a frog of late than before, blinked at him. He seemed a little nervous. Ah, yes, my Lord Hand. You have seemed unsettled these past few days. Slint swallowed convulsively. No, my Lord Hand. Jon leant back in his seat and looked at the commander of the City Watch again. He seemed to be sweating a little. Good. A shame that your men were unable to find Baelish when I asked them to. As you know, I had to rely on my own man. I'm sure that we would have caught him, my Lord Hand, Slinks mumbled as the sheen of sweat grew a little. We searched most diligently. Yes, said Stannis darkly. I am sure that you did. Slink made a ghastly attempt at a smile, and then, as a silence fell, he twitched a little. Why did you summon me, my Lord Hand? Jon looked about the room as if he had forgotten, and then he leant forwards a little and pointed at the book in front of him, with all its damning numbers. Do you know what this is, Slint? No, my Lord Hand. It is one of the many secret account books owned by the thief and traitor Baelish. It is the one in which he recorded certain payments. Slate looked even sweatier than he had before. Payments for what my lord hand? Bribes. John said the word in a voice as cold as he could make it. Bribes to merchants, bribes to officials, and bribes to members of the city watch. Bribes to gold cloaks. Slate paled but then swallowed and objected. Lies. Everything that Littlefinger wrote there is naught but lies. The man was notorious for his attempts to bribe my brave men, but I took not a penny from him. The words sounded brave, but the sweat dripping off him told of fear. Stannis gazed at him scornfully. Have we mentioned you? Odd that the moment we mention bribes to gold cloaks you immediately protest that you are innocent. Most odd that, unless of course you have a guilty conscience. He looked the man up and down, and then sneered, or indeed that you even know what a conscience is. The commander of the Gold Cloaks licked his lips nervously, and then his eyes flickered from Jon to Stannis and then back to Jon. The words "I am trying to think of a plausible lie" might have been written across his face. But Jon cut him off. Be silent. Your guilt is written here. Plain to see for all. Bribe after bribe after bribe. Small ones at first, but then larger and larger as the years went by. And not just you, there is evidence here of a spreading web of corruption. The officers under you, how much did Baelish pay you to look the other way whilst you bribed them as well? And the others under them, how much coin have you been raking in from all over the place? His finger jabbed down. Did you know that Baelish left notes about what he paid you for? No? How about this? 50 dragons for Slint on the matter of the son of Lord Tywald. I remember that. The wretched little piece of filth raped 3 women here in King's Landing, and yet somehow none of them lived long enough to identify the boy in front of me. They all had their throats cut, and I had to dismiss the matter, much to my anger. And now I find that you had a hand in it. I care not a jot that the boy later died when he was stabbed in the groin by another woman, and in fact I would reward that woman if I knew who she was. You conspired with Baelish and Tywald to hide the truth. Lois White was as white as a sheet now, his fingers opening and closing convulsively at his sides. He was also shaking a little, and there was a suspicion of something in the air that made Jon suspect that Bladdercarroll was becoming an issue for him. And the list continues. Not merely bribes, but crimes as well. Perjury. Murder in places. Zlank made a noise of protest, but Jon again cut him off. Yes, murder. Did you think that it can be seen in any other way? Men bribed to look the other way whilst innocent people were disposed of by guilty men. Other men paid to lie to cover up the crimes of others. And all of this resulting in a steady stream of coin flowing in your direction, until it became a river. Lies, squealed Slint, very pale now. All falsehoods and lies. Liar, Jon roared. You didn't even bother hiding the gold, and more than the gold. Baelish paid you in property as well. 3 businesses that you had long coveted in which he was obliging enough to help drive out of business so you could appropriate them, and you were too stupid to pass them on to anyone else, but instead you kept them for yourself. Thanks to you and Baelish, the Gold Cloaks are little more than another gang in this city. Gold Cloaks, Midden Cloaks, more like. You've dragged your cloak through the filth, and enough of it has finally stuck to you. He leant back and stared at Selene. The wretched man had one hand on the pommel of his sword now, and he looked as if he was a hairbreadth away from drawing it. If you draw that sword, Stannis grunted, you'll be dead before the tips clears the scabbard. I promise you that, Slaint. I've killed a lot of men. Reachmen, Targaryen loyalists, Ironborn, pirates. I'm not like the scum you confront. Whenever someone like you can be bothered to confront actual criminals, I can gut you like a fish where you stand. I promise it. Sleent eyed him like a cornered animal, and then Stannis did something that unnerved the Gold Cloak almost as much as it unnerved Jon. He smiled slightly at him. It looked a bit like a death rictus, but it was a smile. The Gold Cloak made a whimpering noise, and Jon made a note to get someone scrub the spot where he was standing. Yes, there was a small puddle there, and then Slaint lifted a shaking hand off the pommel and tried to say something. All that emerged was another whimper. Quill! Jon shouted, and the door flew open to reveal Quill and 2 other men in full armor and holding drawn swords. My Lord Hand, this man is under arrest on charges of corruption. Strip of his weapons, his armor, and above all, the cloak that he has disgraced. "Aye, my lord hand," Quill said tersely as he removed Slink's sword and dagger, grimacing a little at the puddle. "And then, the black cells, the king will work out what to do with him." Slink made another noise of distress, but allowed himself to be led away by the grim-faced guards. Jon watched them all go, and then nodded as a servant darted in with a bucket to scrub the puddle away before leaving, closing the door as he went. "What will you do with the gold cloaks now?" Stannis asked. "I know not. Their upper ranks are as corrupt as Slaynit. Takers of bribes, and that might be the least of their crimes." He ran a hand over his face. "I think that the worst of them will have to go to the wall. I can't send them all, though. That will leave the city in a parlous state." Stannis thought about this, looking about as grim as he could ever remember seeing him. "I see your point. Much as I would dismiss every guilty man, that would gut the City Watch almost completely. Winnow out the worst and then make the lower ones redeem themselves. Review them regularly. Who will you appoint in their place? I know not that either. We need a man who can lead and not be corrupted. If he was not so vital to you, I would suggest Sir Davos Seaworth as a temporary replacement. Or can you spare him?" Stannis ground his teeth a little and then nodded. "He would do at a pinch. It would be a bad blow to lose him even for a month, but I could just spare him for a while." Jon sighed and then stepped closer to Stannis and lowered his voice down to a whisper. "We need more reliable men than we have, especially as this business of the king's great matter must be resolved and soon. The queen has already sent me a list of men that she thinks would be suitable to be the new master of coin. Not one of them is acceptable to me. Lanciers or men close to her father. Both, and a number who would merely bind themselves closer to her in the hope of a future reward. I have no doubt that once she hears that the gold cloaks need to be placed in order, she will volunteer the services of a large number of Lannister guards, and then suggest some replacements for Slynt. Then we shall have to preempt her. I can bring in men from Dragonstone, just as you can from the Vale, reliable men. When we finally move, we need to control the city, and the gold cloaks are the key to it." He looked annoyed. "This makes things complicated." "Aye. We cannot move until the ground beneath our feet is certain again. And at the moment, what with Baelish and now Slynt, well, things are in flux." He stared out of the Nine. "More in flux, perhaps, than I first thought. This business with the Great Sept and the tales of people looking to the north, well, I need to send a raven to Winterfell to meet with Ned Stark as soon as possible." He saw Stannis pull a face, and he nodded. "I know, more delay, but something that I cannot explain is happening. In the meantime, we must do what we can with the tools that we have. Send me Seaworth when you can spare him today. He'll need to clean out the headquarters of the Gold Cloaks with some reliable men as well. I'll send him when I can." "Do you really mean to leave the decision of what to do with Slain to Robert? I thought that you would send him to the wall." Jon pulled a face of his own. "I do not think that my good brother would thank me for sending the most corrupt man still remaining in King's Landing to the wall. For one thing, he might try and sell it to the wildlings. For another, he might leave a trail of piss and slime all over it. I jest, but he's a bad bargain, even for the wall." "True enough." There was a formal knock at the door, and they both turned to face. "Enter." Quill entered. "My lords, a signal from the harbor, from Sir Davos Seaworth. The king's ship is in sight. Jaime." He was in a dark mood as he rode down to the docks behind the Hand and Old Stoneface. The encounter with Dawn the other day had stirred a lot of memories that he'd worked very hard to try and repress. Memories of his youth. Memories of his first days in the Kingsguard. He'd worshipped some of those men at first. Arthur Dayne had been his ideal, as a knight. What could be said about Barristan the Bold, except high praise? Jonathan Derry, Lewin Martell, names that had made him tongue-tied and nervous. And then, of course, old Gerald Hightower, the White Bull himself. That admiration had died on the same day that the Starks had died in fire and blood and screaming, in a throne room filled with deathly, silent men and women, watching white-faced as a terrible crime was committed that eventually destroyed the Targaryen dynasty. You swore a vow to guard the king, not to judge him. Hightower's words he must have known, were hollow and worthless. They had both known that Aerys was then far beyond mad. His cackling glee at the agonies of both Starks was more than proof of that, but he was in the Kingsguard now, and effectively a hostage. So he had turned his pride in his white cloak into something else. Duty. and then again into a careful watchfulness, especially after the death of Elia and the children. After all he had done to save them. And now here he was, Kingsguard to the Fat King, a man who had let himself go at such a pace that it still astonished him at times. He sometimes wondered why Robert Baratheon had wasted himself in the way that he had, before shrugging and deciding that he didn't care anymore. He shook himself slightly as they arrived at the docks, and he repressed a more recent memory, the feel of Dawn twisting in his grip like a snake trying to get away. What had that been about? He had thought about approaching young Lord Dian and asking him before he and Dondarrion left for the north in a day or so, but for once in his life his nerve had failed him. The sound of a growing crowd brought him back to where he was. The ship was approaching, slowly creeping next to the docks. It looked like all ships did to him, although if Searworth was here, he could probably tell him where it had come from. He put on his best beaming smile for the crowd and dismounted. He filtered out what they were saying about him. He didn't care. And then he saw the king and frowned. Robert Baratheon was prowling around the deck like a caged wolf, waiting for the ship to dock. When it did, he stood by his stanchion and drummed his fingers on it as the gangplank was maneuvered into place, and when it was, he at last stormed down it, with Barristan Selmy behind him and Renly Baratheon behind him in turn. He did his best not to blink in surprise. The Fat King had changed. He was still fat, but he was thinner than he had been when he had left. And there were other differences. He was clean-shaven now, with his hair also cut to half its length, and he blazed with energy, as if he had finally rediscovered some vital wellspring within himself. Oh, and then there was the massive sword that was strapped to his back. It looked old and ancient and dangerous in a way that he couldn't put his finger on. "Zorn!" Baratheon shouted as he strode rapidly forwards before clasping hands with a clearly startled Jon Arryn. "Good to see you again. Where's my horse?" "That one." "Right. The Red Keep and Bloody Fast. We have a lot to do." And then he leapt on the proffered horse and spurted into a fast trot up the hill, accelerating to a gallop in places as Selmy and Renly Baratheon took their places at his side. Jaime and the other mounted as fast as they could, and as Jaime galloped up the hill, he wondered what in the name of the Seven Hells was going on. In the end, he did catch up with them. Sadly not through great horsemanship, but rather because they had stopped to stare at the head of the late Petty Abolish. "Jon," Robert Baratheon called out. "Yes, your grace," Arryn panted as he reined in. "Why is the head of my master of coin looking down at me from a spike?" "He was stealing from you, your grace." A dark flush stole over the back of the big man's neck, and then he spurred his horse again, trotting quickly into the Red Keep. When they reached the main courtyard, he dismounted. As Jaime also dismounted, he got a better look at the sword. It was very old indeed. "I see that you have a new sword, your grace," he called out. "Well, so to speak." Robert Baratheon turned on his heel, and in doing so, loomed over Jaime slightly, and for a moment, just a moment, Jaime seemed to see the demon of the trident in front of him. And then Baratheon smiled and the spell was broken. He reached back and slapped the hilt of the sword. "Founds, this at Storm's End, the sword of my ancestors, the sword of the Durrandons. It was waiting for me in the Durrandon tombs there." There was a scoffing noise. "Durrandons at Storm's End? What nonsense is this?" Stannis Baratheon did not look as if he believed a word of what his brother had just said. Oddly enough, instead of being angry at the scathing tone used by his younger brother, Robert just looked steadily at him. "It was at the end of the long passage, brother, under where the Godswood used to be." It was young Edric who spotted that the stones at the end of the passage were mortared together, but the walls laid stone on stone. "We took down the mortared stones and discovered that the passage led to the tombs." Stannis listened to this with a scowl, and then what Jaime thought might have been the beginning, a facial tic. "Truly?" "Truly, Lord Stannis," Barristan Selmy said gravely as he approached from one side. "I was there along with Lord Renly, and within he seemed to shake his head in bewilderment. There was a statue," the Fat King said solemnly, "and it was holding this sword here. I approached it, and the eyes opened. Magic, Stannis. It was magic. The eyes burned with red fire. Storm King, it called me, and then it gave me the sword and told me to go north. Next bit's a bit hazy as I think I fell over, but when I came to, I was holding the sword." Jerne looked into the records and the inscriptions. "Do you know what this is, Stannis?" "Jon, Stormbreaker." There was a long silence. It was broken by Robert Baratheon clapping his two hands together. Right, Littlefinger's dead. After stealing from me, you say? So what else has happened? And then passed into the Red Keep as Aaron talked quietly to Baratheon. Jaime watched everyone go silently. He had the oddest feeling that the world was changing before his very eyes. Robert. Much to his surprise, Jon and Stannis did not take him to any room that he had seen before. Instead, they seemed to wander until they found a smallish room, without window, and with a chimney that received a great deal of attention from the other two. Renly had wandered off somewhere and solemnly stood guard outside. I take it that I'm about to hear bad news for my ears only. He saw Jon nod and he sighed. Right then, if you're both satisfied with this room, would you mind telling me why you're so worried about eavesdroppers and then what the bloody hell happened with Baelish? This place is a warren, your grace, Jon admitted, and there are far too many places for people to overhear things. I think that we never realized how paranoid the dragons were. As for Baelish, he was indeed stealing from you. Stealing on a scale that still beggars belief. As Master of Coin, he had every chance to divert coin. He even stole from loans made by Tywin Lannister, and also the Iron Bank. This rocked him back on his heels. Oh, ambitious of the bastard, he thought about and then flushed a little. Damn it. I always scorned counting coppers. I should have listened to you, Jon. So, how bad is it? Not as bad as I first feared. Ironically, he was using the coin he stole to buy buildings and set up legal businesses, because he often used further stolen coin to make improvements to those places. He increased their value. And because we found all of Baelish's accounts and records, we now own those properties and businesses. Robert stared at the man, and then threw his head back and roared with laughter. Oh, very nice. Ironic. I take it we can sell them? Aye, if need be. And we also found all the money he'd squirreled away in Essos. The Iron Bank is happier with us now, and Tywin Lannister is being sent the details of what Beggius owned in the Westerlands. 'Tis a goodly amount. That was good, but then Robert stared at the other two. There's something else, isn't there? What else was Baelish up to? Stannis stepped forwards. Sir Dorwith was taking young Robert Arryn north to White Harbor so that he could travel to Winterfell and foster with Ned. Aye, I remember talk of that. It's a good idea. I've sent Edric there myself. Well, one of the crew was a ne'er-do-well, hired by Baelish. His instructions were to kill Ned's man Castle, set a fire on the ship, and then flee with Robert Arryn. What? Kidnap your son? Why? We do not yet know. Not truly. Jon broke in. Some scheme of Baelish from his twisted mind, and there was another plot. It seems that someone has been poisoning young Robert. He is free of it now, but there is some reason to believe that Baelish gave my wife the poison by pretending that it was some kind of medicine. Various tendons crackled as Robert clenched his fists. Baby was poisoning my young namesake. It's a good thing you killed him before I arrived. I would have used Stormbreaker to chop his fucking head off. He glared at them both. Right. Now, what else? The mountain clans of the Vale have vanished. He stared at Jon as if he was raving mad. What? I'm afraid you heard me, your grace. They appeared before the Bloody Gate and told the Blackfish that they were going to fight the others in the north. And then they vanished. No one's seen them since. The others in the north? And then the Blackwoods and the Brackens called a truce and have sworn a great oath to keep that truce as they need to, fight the others. He knew it. Something had indeed changed. War was indeed in the air. But the others, they were a legend, weren't they? Then a further thought struck him. Stormbreaker was supposed to be a legend too, yet it was now at his back. What else? The statues of the Seven in the Great Sept have all changed and are now pointing north. The Septons are in an uproar over this apparent miracle, and things are unsettled as a result. Different interpretations are flying around. He sat down at this. Gods, but I hate religion, he muttered, running a hand over his face. Right. We need to see Ned as soon as possible, and we also need to lance this religious boil. For the first part, I was going to call him south to River Run, or even Moat Caelan, to talk about all of this business about mention of the others. For the second part, I do not know. There is a final thing. Your grace. Go on. Baetier Yeles was bribing the gold cloaks. Jaintius was far more corrupt than we had ever feared. In fact, the entire higher ranks of the gold cloaks must be sent to the wall. They have all failed spectacularly. He scowled. Gods, I knew the man was bad, but truly that bad. Worse, if anything. We have all Baelis's secret account books. It's all in black and white. Slaint was paid to look the other way in cases of assault, rape, and even murder. Rage filled him. Was he? Very well. Ned always says that the man who sets the punishment must also swing the sword. I shall damn well do so. Stormbreaker will taste blood again. He paused. And I need to spar before and perhaps even after that. Got too much damn fat on me. If a war is coming, I'll greet it as close as I can get to how I was at the Trident. The other two gaped at him a little, and then they nodded. Brother Stannis said after a long moment, "What happened to you?" This was a good question, and he paused at the door. I have a purpose again. And then he swept out down the corridor, Somley at his side. He needed to spar. War was coming.